Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Crucible. I'm your host, Andrew Wilson. And tonight we've got Pisco going head-to-head with Rob Noerr. These guys go at it on Twitter all the fucking time. They go at it with each other all the time. But this is the first time they're going at it in a moderated debate here on the Crucible. It'll be a full runtime tonight. We expect about 3 hours. Make sure that if you want to call in, you're welcome to. Mods will have that ready for you guys. Also, a couple of quick kind of house cleaning things. If you want to send in a super chat, you're welcome to. I'll be displaying them if they're interesting enough, even while the debaters are going. If they don't really like that, I don't really give a shit, because ultimately we still have to keep the lights on. Also, make sure to note that we will be doing a mix of super chats and callers. So if we don't get to your super chat immediately, don't worry about it. We are going to get to it. You can send in a super chat via YouTube, or you can send one in via the Dono chat, which you'll find pinned at the top. This is going to probably be a very contentious debate, and I'll probably actually have to earn my money tonight, which I absolutely hate doing, but that's okay. Occasionally, when I put on the moderator hat, I guess I have to do some actual work. And my assumption is tonight is going to be one of those nights. The topic tonight is the January 6th insurrection. Also, they're going to start with a 30-minute kind of back and forth on this fire alarm thing that happened. They wanted 30 minutes to go back and forth on this fucking thing. I don't know why, but they're going to go at it for 30 minutes on that. So it's actually two topics tonight. I'm going to make sure that I keep that at 30 minutes so that we can get to the rest of the debate. You're going to have to shake for that money tonight, Andrew. No, I think it'll be all right, bro. I think it'll be okay. Yeah, Jamal Bowman. Sorry. Whatever. Jamal Bowman. You know, I don't remember all this shit. What did that happen in the news like months ago? You guys are still fighting about it, right? So, all right, whatever. We'll do that too. We might as well. Anyway, ought to be a good debate. We'll be right back with both of our debaters. All right. Well, a little bit longer than the normal intro music, but that's all good. Appreciate both of you being here tonight. Pisco, welcome to the Crucible. First time here. We're happy to have you. Why don't you take a second, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and tell everybody where they can find you.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on this story debate channel and to be talking with Rob Noerr again after a little bit of a hiatus. So I'm Pisco. I'm a lawyer, baby lawyer. I'm like a third-year lawyer, and I like discussing legal topics. And most relevant here, I like discussing FBI institutions, the corruption of the deep state with my friend Rob here. You can find me at Pisco Liddy on Twitter. I also will hop on people's streams. I was on the Hippy Dippy show recently, and I'm on Destiny stream.
That's Dylan Burns' outfit, yeah?
Yeah.
Didn't he just bring it back for a day or something?
Yeah, it was like a last, like a reunion thing.
Gotcha. Yeah, make sure that you stay close to that mic, Pisco. And then Rob Noerr, no slouch here in the Crucible, veteran debater here. Happy to have you back. Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about you and where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm Rob Noerr, populist conservative. I'd like to focus on what I see as corruption. I think corruption is the biggest issue in our establishment institutions. I'd like to talk about that. Was a debater in college, work in home healthcare now, never get to go home. It's my son's 3rd birthday today, so I'm super pumped about that. And I guess I'll be the good, and Pisco could be the bad and the ugly after that intro song. What better way to celebrate my son's 3rd birthday than smacking around some lefties?
Happy birthday to your son.
Should be fun. So I enjoy these. Thanks.
And I actually like Rob. I do like Rob, and I think he's a good person. But we do get chippy on Twitter and whenever we debate. So I don't think we take it personally.
Do not. No. You will be made fun of tonight, but that's okay.
Yeah, that is okay. Anyway, so before we get moving, both the debaters in the background have been briefed. We're going to go ahead and open this debate up with Rob Noerr's opening on the first topic, which is this fucking fire alarm thing, which is fine, right? We'll do that for about a half hour. I'm going to set a timer. Rob, keep your intro somewhat brief if you can, because we have very little time on this topic. And then Pisco, I'm going to give you the same amount of time to respond. Rob, go ahead when you're ready.
All right. The reason this, for those that don't know, Jabal Bowman's a Democratic congressman. They were having a discussion on passing a budget resolution and things like that. Democrats were furious because they didn't have time to read it. So they were coming up with all sorts of delay tactics. In the middle of this, in the Cannon building, the adjacent building where the Senate chambers are, which is attached by a tunnel, Jabal Bowman pulls a fire alarm. Now, the reason this matters as a topic in general is this. When you talk about what makes January 6th an insurrection, as we'll get to in the second topic, the insurrection that people showed up to without firearms and pepper spray, and they found some zip ties there, so they almost overthrow the government. One of the things that will talk about the reason that so many of those people, which I do believe Pisco says every single person that's been charged deserves to be charged. When you debate a lot of these people and you talk about the violence of the left and left-wing insurrections and things like May 30th, 2020, where unlike January 6th, they used lethal weapons in the form of Molotov cocktails to break into the White House. The only thing that stopped them was that there was adequate security there. But one of the things they'll say is, well, they had to be stopping some sort of democratic process. That's what's unique. That's why this is an insurrection, because they were delaying a process of Congress. They were delaying the vote, right? Well, that hurts the narrative when that's exactly what Jabal Bowman did. And I adequately predicted what would happen would be they'd give Bowman a slap on the wrist, but they wouldn't dare charge him with delaying an official proceeding, because that's what they went after so many January 6 people. And it would look really bad for the Democrat and institutional narrative if all of a sudden a Democratic congressman did exactly what they were blaming others for an insurrection. Now, that's why this topic matters in whole, because it is exemplary. It's an obvious case of the same charge they've been celebrating.
Did we lose him?
We lost him. Damn. Rob?
He was on a roll.
Yeah, if you can hear us, you're probably going to have to kill your side of that live stream and reboot.
We're both streaming it, so I feel like...
Yeah, well, he was streaming it, but I think he just has to kill his live stream and then come back on. Damn.
How you been,
It's
Andrew?
going pretty good. Been going pretty good, man. It's been going well. Yeah, I remember this whole debate. You were saying that you thought that you thought that it was an accident or something. He accidentally did that shit. Okay, hang on a second.
Charged.
Okay,
right.
Rob.
I'm going to try to get back.
There's two of you, Rob.
Yeah, I
There's
know.
two of
Great,
you.
right? Duplicating. So
okay, so look, you were at about a minute. I'll give you another minute for your opening. Go ahead.
Okay, and I will try to get back onto my computer feed here, just to let everyone know I'm got a backup computer here because I got stuck at work. But anyway,
Better on the phone. It's better on the cell phone. Stay on the cell phone. Anyway, go ahead.
All right. Then we'll stay on the phone as long as people don't mind. That's great by me. So yeah. Anyways, that's why this issue matters. The reason it matters to talk to Pisco is when you spend so much time talking to someone, even if you think they're partisan beyond hope, it becomes disappointing, especially when it's someone that you like talking to, when they're so obviously bad faith that they're going to make arguments like, I think it was more likely he pulled the fire alarm to get out a door. It's a waste of fucking time to have a conversation with someone about January 6th, for example, or about Burisma or about FBI corruption, issues that they could get way more in the weeds if they can't even admit the most basic of things. Pisco made that argument. The video came out proving that Pisco was wrong. He won't admit that he was wrong. And he was butthurt because I rightfully laughed in his fucking face for making such a shitty argument. So I'm here again today, before we get into the more substantive debate on the more important issue, to laugh at him because he was wrong. He can't take the L. And not only was he wrong in one of the most ridiculous ways possible, trying to argue that it was more likely he pulled that alarm to get out the door than the most evident thing, which was he did so to cause a delay. That's it. That's my opening statement.
Okay, I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes to respond here. Pisco, go ahead.
Sure. I do really think this topic is more of like a meta discussion about our relevant personalities and where we're coming from and what motivates us. And I know that you may not believe it, those of you who are watching from the Crucible or from Rob's audience, but I truly am sincere in everything I say. And you can doubt it, and you can think that what I'm saying is just like manufactured to help the deep state of the Democrats. That's on you. The daylight between Rob and I on this topic is not this massive chasm that you would think. And Rob's reasoning for why me or the DOJ would behave the way we do on this topic just makes no sense whatsoever. Number one, in terms of like what I think should happen to Bowman, I thought he should be charged with pulling a false fire alarm, which I'm glad he was. I always thought that he should be charged with a crime. And if you watch me from day one, I wasn't waiting for talking points to come out from Democrats or whatever. I was responding in real time. You can see my reaction in real time through my Twitter feed, where I'm like saying this is outrageous if it's true. These are the three scenarios that it could be. And I wasn't and am still not ruling out the possibility that he obstructed or attempted to obstruct an official proceeding. I don't say that that's impossible. I still don't. I think that there should be an investigation. That said, my only position has been that I think, given the evidence that's available right now, if the DOJ tried to charge him with obstruction of an official proceeding, that it would be an unreasonable charge given the amount of evidence at this point in time. And it probably wouldn't be successful. So there's not a huge amount of daylight, because if you start to think about why Rob thinks that I have this position, it falls apart. He says, I need there to be a double standard on specifically the obstruction charge, because without Bowman being safe, all the narrative of insurrection drops away. There just is no connection between the Bowman case and obstruction as a charge and the insurrection labeling or narrative, what do you want to call it? We were calling it an insurrection before there were any charges. And trust me, the Supreme Court is looking at the obstruction charges right now. It's before them. They might throw out all of the applications of that obstruction charge as applied to Trump and many other January 6ers. And if they throw out all those charges, I'll still be calling it an insurrection, because it is an insurrection. And there is no necessary connection between obstruction of official proceeding and insurrection. None of it falls away, and I would have no, Bowman is no one to me. I would throw him under the bus in a second. If I was a keen and bad faith operative, it would be the easiest thing for me to do, to throw him under the bus. But I'm giving you my honest take, and that's why we're here.
Okay. Hang on a second. Sorry. So, Rob, I did mute your mic while that was going on, because when you shift, it creates a static feedback.
Okay, I'll mute when I'm not talking myself.
Yeah, well, it's not a big deal. It's just if you're going to shift or something, then you probably want to mute.
I'm very shifty.
If you're grabbing something or if you're shifting around. So with that, gentlemen, I'm going to open up the floor. I'm going to give you, let's see, it's 9:20 now. We're going to let this go until about 9:40. So for you, Pisco, since you've never been here before, I'm very particular when it comes to adhering to moderation. So if I cut in, I expect both of you guys to pay attention. I'm going to let the blood sport flow, but if it gets too out of control and you guys are overlapping to the point it becomes incoherent, basically my job is to break that up and get you back on track. So with that, gentlemen, the floor is open. go ahead.
Rob,
Pisco, were you wrong?
No, my position has remained the same, and it hasn't.
So you still think your position, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to steelman your position right off the gate. Something I could do, but you can't.
Well, I just told you.
You said there were 3 possibilities, was the 3 you could come up with, and none of the 3 were good possibilities. One was that he pulled the alarm without the intention of it going off, didn't think it would go off, right? And to get out the door. You yourself said that that's bullshit.
Well,
I'm sorry.
So that possibility is that he pulled the alarm thinking it would open the door, but not ring any kind of alarm. That
Correct.
To me, is just.
You got to see if he can get back on that laptop too, Rob.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I will do that. So that's scenario 1, right? Okay. Scenario 2 was he pulled the alarm to get out the door, but he knew the
alarm would go off. Yeah.
Correct. Scenario 3 was that it was to cause a delay.
Correct.
1 second. Let me shift here.
And I laid all those out in tweets that people could see in real time. I wasn't waiting, and this is because I think at the heart of this, Rob, and just to be, I'm gonna let you go on your syllogism and you ask your questions and pin me down. But at the heart of this is you're accusing me of bad faith, and you're accusing me of being a piece of shit, bad faith person. And I just don't know, like, who is Bowman to me? What's the rationale for defending Bowman?
That's exactly the point. The fact that he is no one to you, and it would take nothing to just admit, yeah, this was shit. That's clearly what happened. But
then why wouldn't I, Rob?
Because you're bad faith. That's exactly the argument.
What do I get from defending Bowman?
Because you get that you're defending the system that is treating Bowman with a double standard. That's what you're getting. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you, like any other lefty that hates Trump so much and that is willing to overlook the obvious double standard of our law enforcement and intel agencies that constantly go with as hard as a hand as possible after Trump and his connected people, and as easy a hand as possible as anyone that's perceived as enemies of Trump, that the thing is, at the end of the day, you'll cut and run from any particular politician. At the end of the day, if you lose the debate, you could say, okay, I guess maybe Hillary should have been charged. Okay, maybe even Hunter Biden or Joe Biden, maybe. But what you can't do is criticize the obvious double standard, which is the biggest issue. The difference between
Rob, I just want to stop. Your timeline's messed up here because my take was given within days of this action happening.
Right.
And so it's too soon for there to be some kind of law enforcement charging or some formal charge.
We all knew.
I already had my I already had my position out in the open before there were any possibility for some visible move from the Department of Justice.
It was easy to predict that they clearly weren't going to charge him with obstruction because
I didn't know what the video was going to be. I didn't know what all the evidence was going to be.
Finish, because the narrative that was coming out from so many people was that this charge of obstructing official proceeding was so important when it was done by random January 6 people. So it was obvious that they would have a 2-tiered system, and that's why the majority of people were doing this. Now, I want to get back to the 3 scenarios that you outlined. Right. So you said, scenario 1, pulled the alarm, didn't think it would go off, had no intention for it to go off, but did it to get out the door. You say that's not possible.
I think it's the least possible one. And that's why.
No. Let's be clear. You said that's not possible.
What I mean, anything's possible, Rob. What I mean,
but it's beyond the pale to think that guy.
Beyond the pale. I think that he's a middle school teacher. If you pull a fire alarm, the expectation is at least a localized alarm will go off.
Okay, good.
So good.
Okay, so we can move on. Scenario 2 is that he pulled the alarm, knew it would go off, but did it to get out the door. Scenario 3 is he did it to cause a delay. Was it not your argument that it was more likely, although it seems ridiculous, it was more likely that he pulled the alarm knowing it would go off to get out the door than it was that he caused a delay? Was that not your take?
My position in the conversation we have, and you can go back and watch it at a low confidence level. If you put a gun to my head, that is, if you forced me to choose, I would, between the two, I just do not think that there's enough evidence to show the culpable intent. And so given those two options, I think the more likely scenario, though marginally, is the situation in which he's a dumbass, because he's a dumbass no matter what, Rob. And that's the part.
So the question, given now that the audience understands that your position was, for whatever reason you want to bloviate about, that you thought the scenario that he pulled the alarm, knew that it would go off, but did so to go out the door, was more likely than he pulled it for a delay. That's your position, correct? That was your position?
It was and is.
Okay, that's all you have to say. Were you wrong?
No.
So you think still, with the evidence that we could clearly see of the videotape, that Bowman never even attempts to touch the door, doesn't touch the door, tried to get out. You think, given that video evidence, you still think it's more likely he pulled the alarm to exit than he did so for a delay?
Just to be clear, this is gun to my head you know, in
I
a
don't care
situation,
about you. I don't care about your bad faith bloviating.
Look, you listen. You can be upset all you want. My confidence level in this assessment is not particularly high. I don't have access to. I'm supportive of an investigation, and given the two options, the fact that he's in a completely separate building, there doesn't seem to be any reason for a congressperson to think that a building across the street is going to affect proceedings in the main Capitol building. The fact that it's so stupid for him to act so culpable and move the signs to what end? For plausible deniability? How? Is he anticipating there to be a camera, and he was anticipating there to be so? In some respects, the shiftiness of his actions, for me, undermines the notion this was a concerted and targeted effort to actually disrupt proceedings.
Okay, one, we already had this debate where I talked about how at a place like the Capitol, if an adjacent building that's connected by a tunnel has an alarm go off, it's reasonable to suspect that it'll cause some sort of delay. Even if the delay would have just been, oh, sorry, you have to hold it because I can't get there yet because I was in the building that got evacuated, so you have to give me time. So your argument makes no sense.
Wait, Rob, are you a congressperson?
I'm not a congressperson.
Have you undergone the fire drills of the Congress people? Do you know what they know? Have you been working in Congress for years? So you're
what does that have anything to do? It has nothing to do with any of it.
So our intuitions about Jamal Bowman's state of mind surely has to be influenced by what a reasonable congressperson who works there expects from the fire alarm safety and the delayed egress of that area.
So again, you can see this is the sort of bad faith bullshit that you see, which is why I'm so bad. Because now apparently uniquely Congress people, the world that we exist in, where if at the Capitol an alarm goes off, it could cause a delay. No, we can't intuit that Congress people would think similar to that, because Congress people could think differently. They could think, oh, if I put this alarm, it won't cause a delay. And so we don't get mired down in this. I'll just skip ahead.
Hang on, Rob, you gotta let him. You gotta let him respond.
Understand.
Go ahead, Pisco.
My point is, at the start, you have one building and a separate building, and what you're saying is it's obvious that the default assumption of people would be that these fire alarm systems are connected such that if you pull a fire alarm in one place, across the street, a fire alarm goes off in the Capitol building. To me, that's not intuitive to me.
That is not my position.
Then I don't understand then. What you're saying that the buildings are connected and that we can read into that some kind of linked alarm system.
No, it has nothing to do with the linked alarm system. It has to do with, one, the buildings aren't separate, they're connected. Second, if the alarm would only go off in that section of the building, it's still reasonable because it's the Capitol, particularly in contentious times where you're going to talk to us about this insurrection that occurred January 6th, that if an alarm's going off, it could cause a delay all throughout the Capitol. All throughout all of these buildings, because there's an alarm. You don't know why that alarm's going off. You don't know if there's an attack or whatever. So it's reasonable to think that even if it didn't cause a delay, which people have testified it did actually cause a delay, that they took people out one by one and put them back in. So it caused like a 10-minute delay. And it doesn't matter how long the delay was according to the law. You agree with that, right?
What do you mean? That
obstruction of an official proceeding. It doesn't have to obstruct it for like a day or anything.
There's There's going to be a materiality requirement to all these laws.
No, but nonetheless, any sort of it would be if it had even a 10-minute obstruction.
Not if it had a millisecond obstruction.
Well, right, but we're not talking about that.
Even if it didn't obstruct at all, attempted obstruction is still a crime. So it doesn't get him off if his intent was that.
The point I'm trying to make is that there is reason to suspect it's more likely that he intended that obstruction, because even if it didn't cause an evacuation of the adjacent building, which there's a good chance that it could have, would you admit that there's a good chance it could?
It's possible it could have.
Would you admit that a reasonable person could think, hey, if I pull this alarm here in the Capitol, it could cause a delay in the Capitol building next?
I don't know. I don't know about that, Rob.
Would you think that? Do you think that's a possibility?
I don't think, as a general matter, my fire alarm goes off in my building, every now and then. I don't think it's reasonable for me to assume that the building across the street is going to be affected and delayed based on the.
I think that's more
on fire.
I think that's more likely, and I just want to get to the.
Why do you think it's more likely, Rob? When you have a fire alarm go off in your house, do you expect the neighbor's house to be obstructed?
I've told you this then. For example, I spend a lot of time in hospitals because I do home health care. There is a hospital here locally that's connected by a tunnel. I've been in that hospital twice where the alarm goes off in one building and they ask us to temporarily leave the other building because there is a connection. So I've personally seen when separate buildings connected by a tunnel, the alarm goes off in one and you leave another. Well, and we're talking about the Capitol. It makes it more likely at the Capitol because the nature.
You're bringing up evidence of your particular experience in certain places. It's more specific now. You're drawing upon your experience in hospitals.
Okay, I'll get come hell or high water. I'll get to the point I want. So I understand obfuscation of the delays. I get all that good shit, right? But the point is, it's more reasonable to that than to pull the alarm to aggress the building. It's more reasonable to expect there to be a delay. It appears there was a delay. And even if you don't think it would cause a delay in that building, it would give you a plausible reason why they should hold the vote because you can't get there because you and other senators have to now take part in the evacuation, which would also be for a potential delay. Nonetheless, all of that aside.
Why aren't the Republicans looking into him then?
All of that aside.
If it's so obvious.
All of that, I'm not going to answer this question.
Let him finish his point, Pisco. Go ahead, Rob.
All of that aside, all of it's a moot point now because every single one of you could go. You could think whatever you want about like the reasonability of our arguments or anything. The fucking video's there. The guy doesn't even attempt to get out the door, and Pisco's still saying with the fucking video evidence, yeah, he did it to get out the door. That's still the most likely.
Look at the lie there. This is a lie, right? I just told you. Everyone heard it. That I am not foreclosing the possibility that he was trying to obstruct. I just told you that I'm in favor of an investigation. And the reason why I premise this conversation is gun to your head with a low degree of confidence, if you had to pick, which one do you pick, is precisely to avoid what you just did, which is you're now acting as though I'm an advocate with a high degree of confidence for a given position. That's distortion. That's unfair of you, Rob. That's unfair.
That's you're lying about what I'm saying. The degree of your confidence is irrelevant, and I haven't spoke to the degree of your confidence. I'll ask you again since you're trying to weasel out of it. I said, do you still defend your initial position? I don't give a shit about the degrees of confidence. Please let me finish. Let me finish. Your initial position was that it's more likely. And you said, well, degrees of confidence and blah, 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 blah. Whatever. At the end of the day, brass tacks, you think it's more likely he pulled that alarm to get out of the building than he did to cause a delay. And I said, now that we see the video, do you stand by that? You said, yes.
I do. Yes.
Yeah. That's how everyone knows that you're a bad faith piece of shit.
Everyone can see. Now, let's examine the bad faith aspect to it.
I have no interest.
Hang on, Rob, you got to let him respond to what you said. You just said a lot. Go ahead, Pisco.
Why would I be bad faith in this? Let's really think about it. Why would I do this? You might not believe me, but my credibility and what I say matters a lot to me. You know, I went when Biden, the investigation came out that there was revelations of classified documents. I went on Destiny's Stream to say, hey, do not prejudge this investigation. I think there should be a special counsel. I went out and said that. To me, and you might not believe it, but my credibility and my opinions matter to me. Now, why would I risk it all for Bowman? Why not just throw him under the bus if it's so obvious a case? And if it's so obvious a case, why is the Republican Ethics Committee not looking into him?
Okay, I've already answered the part why you would do this, right? I will say this. It would be like if there's video of you cheating on your wife and everyone could see it and it's indisputably accurate video. And your argument is, but why would I cheat on my wife? I love her. Why would I sleep with my wife's hot? Why would it? And you'd be like, but Pisco, here's the video evidence of you doing it. And you'd be like, well, ignore that. Why would I do it?
No,
the video evidence is there for everyone to see, Pisco. Rob. Now, I want to get to the other part of this debate real quick. You can go on and
talk about the bad. You're accusing me of bad faith.
Hang on, Rob. So either one of you is going to have to break the cycle, and he's going to respond so you can get to the next part. But if I let him respond, you get right back into it. I can't move it from there. So Pisco, you can go ahead and respond to what he just said.
You're accusing me of bad faith, that I have an ulterior motive, and I think that your accusation is that ulterior motive is involved somehow in my position with respect to January 6th and how I would treat Trump and Trump supporters. And for me, there's no basis for that. You could say that I'm delusional, but you're taking one step back extra. You're saying you're delusional for a reason. You're delusional because you want to treat Trump people worse. You want to treat Jan 6ers worse. And that is an absurd opinion. There's no basis for that because there's no connection in your head. You said it's so important for these obstruction charges to be linked to insurrection. And it's important for their narrative that they have the obstruction charges and for Democrats not to be implicated, as though there were some necessary connection between obstruction and insurrection, when there's not.
Okay, so I've made my point in that. Did Jamal Bowman push the door to try to get it open?
Initially, he did.
He did? It's what it shows. It doesn't look like that to me.
He did push the... Did you read the affidavit?
I did read it. Right. I read the
affidavit. It says he pushed the door?
I did read that he said that.
Okay. So is your position he pushed the door or didn't push the door?
He did not.
The affidavit says it did. So what are you saying? That the affiant's a liar?
No, he lied. He told the affiant. Did he? Let me ask you this. Let's instead of let's just get the even better part. Do you think that he intended for the alarm to go off? You said it was obvious. Okay, he told the police he didn't. That's a lie.
So I think, and I understand that the lying charge is another one that you're bringing up. I think he did not intend for a global alarm to go off. I think that he probably expected there to be a localized, this is me just theorizing. It's a low degree of confidence. Again, I'm not saying that I'm not the biggest proponent of Jamal Bowman. I'm in favor of investigation. But if, all fucking cards on the table, I think it's probably likely he thought he had a brain fucking fart, didn't think about it that much, and thought there'd just be a little alarm and the door would open.
Here's what Jamal Bowman testified to police. You agree that lying
testified to police?
I'm sorry, this is what he told them. You agree that lying to law enforcement's a crime?
It can be, yeah.
Do you agree that Papadopoulos should have been charged with lying to law enforcement?
100% he should have. I'm glad.
You agree that Flynn should have been charged with lying to law enforcement?
That charge was wrong for the DOJ to step away from
that. Your affiant asked the defendant if he intended to cause a fire alarm, to which he said no.
Yeah, so
that's a lie.
So in that situation, right, with the fire alarm being the global alarm, I think that the reason why he didn't go to the door, if I had to guess, was he saw the entire fucking building in a horrendously loud alarm, and he left it because he's a coward. And listen, I wouldn't vote for Jamal Bowman in a primary. I don't think he's good. I think that when he says that I immediately took responsibility, he's wrong and he's lying there. And so I have no problem saying that he's a scumbag, but I'm not here to say that it's obvious that he had the obstructionist intent, because it's not obvious. And if it were obvious, Rob, you have no answer for this. Why aren't the Republicans investigating him for it?
I'm ready for closing statements on this.
Wait, why aren't the Republicans investigating for him?
I'm ready for closing statements on this.
So you're not going to answer that question?
I'm not going to. I have no interest in answering your bullshit question on this.
Why? Why are you so defensive?
That you know what my answer is going to be? Do you not?
All right,
my answer is
going
to
be
the Republicans are shit anyway. So I don't care.
Gentlemen. Okay. It's 9:38. That gives me enough time to give you both 1 minute to close on this before we can get to the meat of the debate here.
Sure.
Rob, you got 60 seconds, a hard cutoff. Make it count. Go ahead.
Okay, so you can see why it's important to have this debate, because you can see, even if there's video evidence, he'll never admit. We have the fucking video evidence. He still says it's more likely that he was trying to go out the door, even though he didn't attempt to go out the door. You see how he speaks to Bowman's intent, and he gives it the most charitable possible. Even when Bowman directly lied to law enforcement, he says, Pisco says, there's no way he didn't think that pulling it would cause an alarm. But that's what he told police. But Pisco goes, well, I think what he really meant. Now, watch when we talk about Trump. Watch when we get to Trump and about Trump's intent. See if Pisco's equally charitable, where he's willing to go through obvious, blatant lies, like specifically saying, I didn't intend for an alarm to go off. And Pisco goes, well, what I think he meant, what I think his intent was, he'll ignore obvious video evidence. He'll change and speak to people's intent as he sees fit, just like all the other Democrats. So when we go through the rest of this debate, understand that that's what he's doing in all of this when he's talking about an insurrection. I'm good.
Okay. Still at 18 seconds. Go ahead, Pisco. 1 minute.
What goes around comes around. And so the same kind of, you're saying that I'm a mind reader when it comes to Trump. You're a mind reader when it comes to Jamal Bowman. You say the act speaks for itself. But I think that if you were to bring this charge, there'd be a lot of doubt in the mind of an ordinary jury about what the intent was, and a lot of smoke and dirt that a good defense lawyer could bring up. But what's more is, I'm in favor of investigation. Why aren't the Republicans investigating it? And you have no answer for that, because the only answer is they're in on it too. But why would they be in on it, Rob, if it's so obvious and clear? Well, because they're part of it. The same people who are part of the impeachment inquiry, they're this baseless sham. They're going to be the ones who are going to be unwilling to go after Bowman after they just expelled George Santos. They're unwilling to go after Bowman. It makes no sense, Rob. And your accusation of me makes no sense, because before you were saying obstruction is so important. It's so key to their insurrectionist narrative. You know, it's bullshit. They were calling it insurrection before the obstruction charges. If there's no obstruction charges, there'll still be an insurrection things. If Trump is convicted on obstruction, it will not mean that he's ineligible under the insurrection.
That's it. Hard time there. I'm sorry, guys. That's not the normal way we do things on the Crucible, but this was a special request. We humored the special request, and I would like to move in to the actual debate now. I did have one question, because I guess this is a two-parter. I get to ask at least one. Pisco, what the fuck is a global alarm?
Like alarm of the entire building, right? So in New York, I don't know if you're familiar with New York City, but there are emergency doors in the subway systems. And sometimes when you open them, there's like a mini alarm that goes off in a localized area. Sometimes there's like a smoke detector in a particular area that doesn't sound a general alarm. Listen, I did some research into fucking alarms and delayed egress systems in preparation for the Bowman discussions and the aftermath of that whole thing. But there are. Why are you laughing there, Rob?
Doing your prep for your bullshit bad face shilling. Good work.
Well, I think if you're saying that there's no way that a reasonable person could think.
Cue the Benny Hill music.
If you think that there's no reason that a reasonable person could think a alarm opens a door, it would be important and relevant to find out how those delayed egress systems actually work. Because in fact, those delayed egress systems actually get opened on alarms. And you know that, Rob. And if that's the fact,
all right. I almost regret fucking asking it. I almost regret asking it. All right. Fair enough. We got to move on to the heart of the debate here. Okay, with the rest of this, which is based around the insurrection. In this particular case, Rob, you got to open first on the last one. I'm going to let Pisco open first, but that'll give you the last word. For the rest of the runtime, this is what I'd like the topic to stay on. If it moves off of that, I'm going to move it right back. So there's no sense in trying to slither around it. Now, for the purpose of time, I'm only going to give both of you a 4-minute opening statement. That way we can get the debate going. Pisco, go ahead when you're ready. You got 4 minutes on the clock.
January 6th was obviously an insurrection. The mere fact that we can bring up a bunch of edge cases or hard cases that Rob can try to bring up, things that I will agree with him, things like saying Chaz was an insurrection, or that Black Lives Matter attacks on federal installations or certain other violence that took place was an insurrection, obvious cases. But sometimes there are harder cases which he can bring up that don't disprove the need to separate, as the Constitution requires, what is an insurrection from what is not an insurrection. That's kind of an inquiry, I think, that looks mostly at history and what the framers of various provisions that are relevant to us today, such as Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, thought an insurrection was. For those of you who are paying attention, one of the de facto and primary examples of an insurrection history was the Whiskey Rebellion or the Whiskey Insurrection, in which there's barely any loss of life at all. 1 or 2, 3 people died. It was all about like storming the tax collectors and stopping the collection of taxation. But what Rob would have you believe is that anything absent an absolute Civil War style engagement isn't an insurrection. It's an excuse not to think and not to deal with the history and these relevant provisions. It's always going to be difficult to figure out who is therefore engaging in insurrection, and that I think is a more difficult inquiry, and one that requires thought when it comes to Trump and what his actions would be in terms of constituting engagement. But the bigger debate here is Rob's conspiracy theories, because he does know who he thinks engaged in insurrection that day. He blames it on the FBI. Apropos of nothing, with absolutely zero evidence, Rob says it was the FBI and maybe the Department of Defense and who knows, some other scary 3-letter agencies. They're the ones who egged it on. They wanted it to happen. That's Rob's argument. And what he has to show for it, complete bubkiss. I encourage Rob to use his opening to describe all the evidence he has to show that the FBI intended January 6th to happen and not the insurrectionists. What you'll find is, just like most of Rob's conspiracy theories, they fall apart on interrogation. And that's what will happen in this discussion. Is he'll bring up a piece of evidence he sort of knows, and it'll be ripped to shreds. And so that's what I expect to happen, and happy to pass it over to Rob.
Can't hear you, sir.
Sorry.
Nope.
Thank you for that, Pisco. I appreciate it very much. Rob, you have 4 minutes on the clock. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. I'll be more calm and even-handed now. I got out when I needed to in that first part of the debate, though I'll still crush it. So the big issue that I talk about all the time is disparate treatment in our institutions. I think that presidents come and go, individual elected officials come and go, hell, heads of the FBI come and go. But the biggest problem that we have in this country is unelected bureaucrats that really run the show behind the scenes. And these bureaucracies are there to stay. When they're putting their thumb on the scale and going after candidates they don't like or politicians they don't like and protecting the ones they do, that is the crucial threat to our democracy. If, for example, the FBI interfering in our elections is more significant than anything Russia or North Korea Korea or China or any other country could do. Over and over, I've had debates with Pisco and others that show that disparate treatment of the FBI when it comes to Russiagate and lying to get FISA warrants to spy on the president of the United States team, or when it comes to giving like immunity out like candy when it comes to investigating Hillary, even when they're destroying subpoenaed evidence. We've had these debates over and over, Burisma and things of that nature. Now we come to the insurrection of January 6th. January 6th obviously wasn't an insurrection. You don't come to take over the strongest military in the world with zip ties and flags. It's not something that happens. It's clearly a riot that got out of control. The reason that we look at January 6th as an insurrection is because they made it into the Capitol. The question is, how did they make it into the Capitol? Now, Pisco will say he'll agree with me that there were insurrections that have happened in the past. Pisco streamed and was politically active at those points online. I challenge you to show me one time when you ever called out by name those insurrections at the time. He didn't, I assure you. And the point is, the reason we look at something like May 30th, 2020, where actual left-wingers had actual lethal weapons in the form of Molotov cocktails that they were throwing at Secret Service and other guards. The reason it wasn't said to be an insurrection, and I didn't call it an insurrection and others didn't, was because it wasn't an insurrection. It was just people trying to break into the White House. It was a riot that got out of control. It probably would have had people that pre-planned it. But ultimately, the difference was they didn't breach the White House barrier. The question is, how were they able to breach? Pisco knows this. When it comes to a riot, all you need is a handful of bad actors, and if there's not an adequate police response, things could get out of hand. That's the psychology of crowds. And so if you were an intel agents or groups that wanted things to kick off so that you would then, and we see what the net result is, it's been an incredible boon to the people that hate Trump, the Democrats, and the FBI handlers. It's been an incredible boon to them because they've been able to censor any conversation of election security for years. They've been after the largest task force to go after not just Trump and try to keep him off the ballot and things like that, but to also go after his supporters. The fact is, this is what we know. The explanation that Pisco is going to have to give for why the FBI claims that they had intelligence, that an insurrection was going to take place on January 6th, but intentionally did not tell the people tasked with security. And then a bunch of people in the chain of command, including people at the Army, people at the Sergeant at Arms that answered to Nancy Pelosi, etc., when the Capital City Police Chief begged for the National Guard that was only blocks away over and over again, and they said, no, we can't do it because of optics. Pisco's going, what we're doing is looking at two competing reasons. Why didn't the FBI act accordingly before January 6th? Why didn't these agents allow the National Guard to be deployed when they were being begged of it on the day of January 6th? His explanation is going to be, well, I believe them. I believe the FBI was just incompetent, like he'll always say. Yeah, it was bad. They were just incompetent. And he'll believe those in the chain of command that didn't deploy the guard when asked for January 6th. He'll say, well, I believe their testimony. They said they were worried about optics. Imagine being a career security professional that thinks that senators are about to be murdered, and you say, yeah, but I can't deploy guard because it would look bad. And Pisco is also going to have to defend this damned if you do and if you don't, because if Trump would have deployed the guard that day, they would have said, this is proof that he's an authoritarian. But if he doesn't deploy it, they'll say he was an insurrectionist. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. With the opening statement done, gentlemen, I can tell this is also going to be contentious, and that's just fine with me. Happy to have these nice contentious political debates on the channel, but I do expect you both to adhere to moderation. Even if you think it's unfair, chances are you're just wrong. So we're going to turn the floor over to you both. Go ahead. When you're ready, the floor is open.
Rob, you said something really interesting there. You said the FBI withheld information. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's either one of two possibilities, and both are probably true. One, that FBI was aware that there was intelligence that claimed that there would be an attempted insurrection and attempted people attacking congressional members and things like that. But they even though they were having meetings with the Capitol Chief Police, that was the person tasked with defense, they did not relay that information. And second, the information that that may have been relayed was to Yolanda Pittman, who was the intel person at the Capitol Police, and she never relayed that information to Capitol Chief Sund.
So just to be 100% clear, the best evidence you have of the FBI not disclosing information to the Capitol Police, you just admitted that the Norfolk reports that referenced Stop the Steal and spilling blood and getting violent, that everyone points to as the most critical information, you just admitted that the FBI did give that to the Capitol Police, didn't you?
No, that's not true. They did not. They didn't. For example, Steve D'Antoni, the same person that was tasked with being in charge of the Whitner Fednapping hoax, right? He personally was on a phone call with a bunch of other leaders January 5th. Let me ask you this. Let's start with this. I promise.
Is the intelligence division of the Capitol Police
I'll answer. I'll promise. Well, let's just.
Easy question.
I promise I'll answer. Just answer this question.
Rob, hang on. Pisco asked the question. Go ahead.
Is the intelligence division of the Capitol Police part of the Capitol Police? And
Yes.
did the FBI relay that information to the Capitol Police?
We're not sure.
Hey, Stephen Sund testified under oath that they did 2 times.
So what Stephen Sund?
Were you aware of that? Sorry, were you aware of that?
Yes, and Stephen Sund testified that there was things that may have been given to Yolanda Pittman, but even that wasn't wasn't expansive of all of the intelligence.
It was the exact report cited.
Hang on, guys. Listen, first, before we get into this any further, for the audience is asking for this, and I would like this as well. Can both of you define insurrection for me?
Yes. So I go by what I think was an excellent definition by the District Court of Colorado, which defined insurrection as a public use of force or threat of force by a group of people to hinder or prevent execution of the Constitution of the United States. That's an insurrection against the United States Constitution. Now, understand, that's a general term that there's gonna be some hard cases of materiality. Like, is attacking a post officer, one time insurrection. But that doesn't disprove the
I understand, but let's just go with the strict definition, and you pick this from Colorado as your definition. Why?
I picked it because I think it's best in keeping with the historical definition that the framers used for insurrection. And whatever definition we have needs to include the Whiskey Rebellion, where very few people died, and the Civil War. It needs to be large enough to include both. That's
understood. And then, Rob, can you define it and then tell us why as well?
Yeah, I would say insurrection. The problem with the definition of it is you could use various and competing legal interpretations, but there's also then colloquially what we can consider an insurrection. I don't mind using Pisco's definition. My just general definition would be an insurrection is a serious attempt to overthrow the government, right? The problem with using Pisco's definition from the Colorado case is there are a litany of organizations that have been sponsored by Democrats that would also meet that definition. For example, Black Lives Matter, the organization, talked about systemic police, talked about wanting to overthrow the systemic racism of the United States government and things that were issued in the United States government. They attacked federal buildings. That means that every Democrat, according to this Colorado ruling, every Democrat in office should be removed from office because they've supported insurrectionists, particularly people like Kamala Harris that push bail funds.
Okay, I think we get it too, right? So we now have both of your definitions, and we have the reasons for those definitions.
Wait, I just want to point out. I don't think we do have a definition, Rob. Rob said, I guess we could use yours or whatever, but it doesn't matter. What he's trying to show you is he's not actually interested in defining what is and what isn't. He doesn't even want to talk about what's an insurrection.
I said colloquially, it would be a serious attempt to overthrow the government of the United States.
Okay, where are you getting that from?
That's the definition that I would use colloquially.
Why are you using a colloquial definition for this?
Because I think that that's the sort of thing that we should do, because if we apply a specific definition like you're doing, then we could say that there have been thousands of organizations that met that definition, which would then end up meaning thousands of people that are in office should be removed from office.
What you're saying is you're going to let the outcomes dictate the meaning of the word. What you're saying is I don't like the outcome of having so much legal consequence related to this definition that I don't like, and so I'm going to define the word in a way to make it more narrow so that I don't have to even think about what is and what's not an insurrection.
No, the difference between me and you is this. I might have disagreements on what I think an insurrection is or any particular law. But if it's going to be one way or the other, I just want it to be equally applied. So if we go with the definition you're saying, using force or the threat of force in public for, what was it, for political...
By a group of people.
By a group of people.
That execution of the Constitution of the United States. So it'd be...
Black Lives Matter.
It's insurrection against the Constitution of the United States.
Black Lives Matter.
Now, I just told you that there are many instances of Black Lives Matter violence, which would be insurrections.
Right.
By the way, I don't think all of the January 6ers are insurrectionists, but there was at least one insurrection on January 6th. There were many insurrections in Black Lives Matter. Chaz was undoubtedly an insurrection. Classically an insurrection. But what you want to do is, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to apply the standard. I don't want to have to apply it to Republicans. And so that's why I'm going to have
not
a crazy high, narrow standard that no reasonable person would accept that as a definition.
That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is it is unprecedented in the attempts that they're going after Trump and Trump supporters, claiming that it's an insurrection, including kicking him off ballots before he's even been criminally charged with anything like an insurrection. And what I'm saying is, if we're going to use this definition from 1860 or whenever it is that the Colorado court seemed to suggest as a possible definition, although they didn't accept that as their definition, but if we're going to use that, then we should say, okay, that's fine. We could use that, and then let's see how that applies across the board. I think that's a bad idea, but that's okay. If we want to, if that's the definition we set on, and therefore we say Kamala Harris can't be on the ballot because she pushed a bail fund for violent Black Lives Matter.
This is a
or
little
people. No. Please let me finish. Yeah, or we say, for example, people like AOC that supported groups that were literally attacking ICE facilities and removing American flags and then flying flags of other countries. If we're going to say that those are people that engaged in an insurrection as well by providing aid and support to them, then I'm totally fine with that. But what I'm saying is that oftentimes what can happen is you could go back like to some of these older laws and things like that have passed. The intent of the law, if we really look at it, was about the Civil War, which, by the way, they basically gave a full pardon on this specific part of this law within like 10 or 15 years, even of people that served in the Civil War a few years after it. So to say that, this law, that insurrection that was applied about the Civil War, that means Trump and his people having a riot that got out of control. That's also insurrection. I have no interest in this section of the debate, so you can finish up and have the last word on it. I really don't give a shit.
That's why I did a point of order, because he's not committing to a definition. He doesn't want to, right? He'll say,
I gave a definition.
2 years. But like under your definition, Rob, would you agree that the whiskey insurrection was not an insurrection?
I think so. It was the Whiskey Rebellion. So to
it's
call
also
it the
called whiskey insurrection. Look it up.
So the difference with the Whiskey Rebellion would be that it was a bunch of people that had arms that were basically arms of the current day, right? And that formed themselves into a militia that attended a battlefield, literally intending to provide arms to clash with the United States federal government.
So your definition of insurrection requires the use of arms. That's a new thing.
Yes, I think that if it was a bunch of people that didn't show up with the intended purpose of being violent, and they didn't have weapons, and they just maybe had some shovels and, some pencils and shit like that, and then all of a sudden there started to be a back and forth clash with a couple people and things got out of hand, I don't think it would have been an insurrection.
This is the shell game, right? He's making up new variables as it goes along. Right? So he just said, if your initial plan wasn't to be violent, you're just carrying shovels, as though there couldn't be, and it wasn't well recognized that sporadic insurrections could occur, that people could be driven to lawlessness and public displays of force in a way that wasn't anticipated. But there's no basis for that definition or for that categorical exception you put in, other than to exclude the things that you want to defend and make us seem unreasonable for trying to settle on a definition. You don't want to settle on a definition. Every time we push you, you add new variables that are drawn from nowhere. Settle on a definition.
I gave my definition. No, I'm going to get
hang on. Stop. It's actually perfectly fine for Rob to have a separate definition than what you have. You've taken him to task on what you think the problems with his definition are. It's perfectly acceptable for you to have a different definition from his. He's taking you to task on what your definition is. This portion of the debate's becoming pedantic, and we're not making any more progress in it. So I'd like to move to the next portion and allow you guys to continue to tangle up where you were. Now that the audience understands what you're talking about and where you're coming from, go ahead, gentlemen.
Okay. Who was the principal person that you think was the most important person, or the principal person that was tasked with defense of the Capitol on January 6th?
Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States.
And so you think that when it came to the tactical decisions on the ground and things like that, that Donald Trump should have been the person that was the front man?
No one said that, but he's the point person. And in matters of utmost national security, he has a absolute duty to stay informed. And guess what? When he has any role, forget about everything I have to say about his volitional role in bringing everyone there and his incitement. Forget about that. Put that to the side. For him not to pick up the phone and the horn, call McCarthy, call Miller, and say, hey, do you think I should tweet to get these people out of here? This is horrible. There is no defense of that. You won't, and I bet you're not going to give a single defense for his failure to give a call and say, hey, can I tweet something to help you guys out? What can I do?
Who was the principal person that was tactically tasked with defending the security of the Capitol that day? Who's the principal person?
The principal was the civilian authorities. And actually, if you look at the Department of Defense, report and analysis, which I'm sure you have, the point federal agency on point was the Department of Justice, was the key federal agency, and obviously the Capitol Police and Metropolitan Police in equal measure, Rob, because guess what? which was the only request for the National Guard that existed prior to January 6th? Was it the Capitol Police?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
It was the Metropolitan Police.
That's not true. Stephen Sund requested several times.
He requested Irving. He requested Irving. That was not a request to the Department of Defense. The only request that went to the Department of Defense from another agency, and it was asked multiple times, the DOD, in multiple calls. If you check the DOD report, which, by the way, I have my own issues with, I don't just to take it at face value, but at the very least,
I'd like to get a word in. I understand
so it's not just the Capitol Police. The only people who put a request was Mayor Bowser, and that was a request for assistance that was for like 300 or 400 people, and DOD almost denied them, just so you know.
Okay, so the filibuster there, and you could see from the previous section of the debate that Pisco can't be bad faith. The person that's tasked with actual security of the on-the-ground premises of the Capitol is the Capital City Police, and the person in charge of those, the chief, was a man by the name of Stephen Sund. That who is in charge of security on the. That's why Conti, the head of the Metropolitan Police, was on the phone and was listening to the orders of Sund. Sund was the one that was directing, as he always is, the Capital City Police chief, that directs the on-the-ground response for security. Now, when he talks, let's answer a couple of the bullshit things that he says here. Now, I just want to be clear. When he delays, it wasn't Sund, it was the DOJ, it was the DOD, it was Donald Trump. It's all bullshit. He knows that you probably don't know that the way this work is, it's the Capital City Police, and it's Stephen Sund was the person that was tasked with being the point person for directing. So much so that if the National Guard gets sworn in, they have to be sworn in as Capital City police officers, because he's the person that ultimately is charged with deploying them where they need to be.
Capital City or Metropolitan Police?
Capital City Police.
Which one?
Capital City Police.
How sure are you?
I'm absolutely positive. Okay. Nonetheless, to continue, he says that Mario Bowser requested that the National Guard be deployed. That's not true. For example, Donald Trump said that he wanted 10,000 guard there, and Mario Bowser denied that request. What she did say was that she wanted some National Guard to be available for traffic. Not for protection of the Capitol, but to direct traffic.
How many RFAs?
I let you filibuster for a long time. I appreciate your efforts to filibuster and then interrupt me. I will not find those persuasive.
You're just wrong.
Stephen Sund. So now that we've determined that Stephen Sund was the person that was tasked with being in charge of it, what we have is that, yes, it is true that the person underneath him in the intel agency, Yolanda Pittman, she did get some sort of information from the FBI, but not in totality. She didn't get all of the information that would have been important to have that day. And certainly when the FBI leaders were on the phone the day before with the Capital City Police chief, they didn't mention anything and let that chief come up with a plan that they were hearing that said they were basically treating the threat level of this the same as they did other MAGA Million Man marches and things like that. They expected some slight skirmishes, and that was about it.
So this is the conspiracy that Rob would have you believe. Now, first of all, no one denies the key role of the Capital City Police. They were heroes that day, and I don't think that Sund is necessarily even a bad person. I take Sund at his word over like Irving on some of these calls where he has been able to produce receipts, and so I don't think that Sund is like a bad person. And Sund is obviously very responsible. And I think if you look at the story, even the one the DoD provides, he has a lot of foresight in terms of what is needed for the response. No doubt about it. But there was exactly one RFA for help from the Department of Defense, and that came from Mayor Bowser. Exactly one. No offer made whatsoever by Donald Trump to anybody in terms of providing DC National Guard. Doesn't exist. The Christopher Miller testified to that fact. No one in either the Capital City Police or the secretaries, secretaries of arms or the DC Metropolitan Police have ever fielded a request. The DC mayor wouldn't be able to deny the authority of Trump to mobilize the DC National Guard. She's not in the chain of command. But this is the conspiracy that Rob wants you to believe. Rob wants you to believe that the FBI sent this key report to the Capitol Police on purpose, and then purposely didn't bring it up in a conversation with the key heads at a later date. If this is part of a grand conspiracy, why do they send the report to the Capitol Police at all? How can they rely on this not getting out?
They sent it to someone that clearly exhibited that day that they weren't taking seriously, just like the FBI wasn't. There's no reason, right, that some lower level people sends a report to some low level person, then the higher up person that has this intelligence is literally sitting the day before on the planning and hearing the planning saying, we don't have any direct evidence of anything like this going to occur, and keeps his mouth shut. By the way, the same FBI guy that literally accomplished the same task with the Whitmer thing. where they allowed a Whitmer kidnapping host that they helped facilitate to go on so that they could crack down on MAGA people time predictably for the election, so that they
on people who were going to kidnap.
That were entrapped, which you're not allowed to do. But nonetheless, can you explain to me why Steve D'Antona did not, and the FBI in their multiple calls of the security planning with Steven Sund and all of these other agencies, let them repeatedly say we don't have specific intelligence when they knew there was intelligence and
testified that they were not aware of that specific threat, and that
so the FBI was unaware. The FBI leaders were unaware.
Hang on a second. As you're well aware, and something that you love to do is to take these when it's convenient for you. The DOJ and the FBI are one thing, but you parse them out when you need to. But this one component of the Department of Justice doesn't necessarily talk to Acting Attorney General Rosen every time they have a threat assessment. Those threat assessments, by the way, are spread along across the intelligence community. The Secret Service also had a threat report that they spread. The Capitol Police itself, if you look at the GAO report on the number of threats that existed, the Capitol Police had its own threat assessment that existed on January 3rd that it did not give to every single person. And as a result of that specific threat, the Steven Sund testified that he increased the perimeter and increased requests for assistance. And so it is the case. There were multiple threats, going along, and multiple inquiries and investigations going on about possible threats. But you want to distill it into a unified conspiracy to keep Sund out of the loop for the purpose of letting rioters, insurrectionists, because you're going to predict all this, of course, go into the Capitol and do some violence, but not enough violence to actually kill anybody. And this was all this Machiavellian scheme. Zero evidence.
No, hang on, Rob, before you respond, and you're going to have plenty of time. I'm going to give the floor to you. We're an hour in. I need to take a minute, do some house cleaning here. First of all, remember, you guys can donate a super chat on the Dono chat. You can send in a super chat if you have a question for the debaters. But in the next 10 minutes, the mods are going to start spamming the link. Make sure you get into the caller queue, or else you're not going to probably be able to get your call questions in. Obviously, a lot of people are very interested in this debate. Pisco, real quick, how tall are you?
6 foot.
He's 6 foot, so you all lose. All right, back to you, Rob. Go ahead.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that it is absurd to think that the FBI had people that were aware that there was about to be an insurrection. And now what we're told is it's always, anytime you have this FBI doing something that looks really bad, we're told it was just incompetence. So what Pisco wants you to believe, if you read the FBI indictments of people like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, they had many people stationed within. In fact, I think it was the Oath Keepers, the vice president of the Oath Keepers. That was a confidential human source for the FBI. They have all these people implanted that are supposedly saying things like, we're going to violently overthrow the government, we're going to kill police officers, we're going to attack Mike Pence, we're going to do all of this stuff. They have these people embedded. They're writing these reports, but no one at the top of the FBI is getting them. They just didn't know. And so they send it to a lower level people at the Capitol. And then meanwhile, when the FBI is meeting with the day before on January 5th, when they're meeting, right, with the people that are talking about security, and the security they're coming up with is basically, we're not going to have the National Guard. We're going to treat this very similarly to the other rallies that we've seen with Trump in the past. It was just incompetence at the FBI that no one kicked it up to the chain of command at the FBI so someone could say, whoa, we actually have documents after documents that say that there's an insurrection about to occur. That's your argument, that it was just some sort of incompetence at the FBI that they didn't tell Steve D'Antona and the other leaders?
Of course you're wrong. You're obviously wrong. They did not have perfect information that there was going to be an insurrection. Read the words used in the report, the situational information report that we're referencing, the one that everyone cites, the January 5th one. It doesn't say we know to a certainty that there's going to be it says the report indicated that potential violence could occur in Washington, D.C. in connection with the Stop the Steal protest. In addition, the FBI identified an online thread discussing calls for violence, including the threat to spill blood of counter-protesters with calls to get violent. They shared that report with the Capitol Police. It wasn't the only people they shared it with. They shared it with the DOD as well. It happened to be people who in the DOD who were like who weren't top people. It happened to be on the
So
list.
Let me be clear.
I'm not done. You're acting as though these reports were like a surefire thing. We know there's going to be.
No, hang on. To be fair, Pisco, you've had actually more speaking time so far than Rob has. Go ahead, Rob.
I'm not done. Ignore that video evidence that you see. You see what I'm talking about? So what Stephen Sund actually testified to is, yes, there were these generic reports that there could be violence against counter protesters. That sort of stuff's true. What Sund's talking about that was never relayed to him and his team was specific claims of things like, we're going to kill the palace guards, and that they're going to harm Mike Pence, and that they're going to overthrow the government. They have that intel, and they've used that intel in their prosecution of people with the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, but they never shared that intel. And what Sund says is that made a material difference on how they employed security on the day of January 6th. Because if instead of vague threats, they had these specific threats, that there were targets to specifically Congress people and things like that, then they would have been able to deploy the National Guard most likely. Then they would have been able to deploy more officers, not just from the Capital City Police, but also the Metro Police and stuff like that. In fact, there's a guy that's the sergeant of arms under Nancy Pelosi, who we'll get to here in a minute. The day of January 6th refused to allow the National Guard to be deployed. He also told Stephen Sund on January 3rd, when Sund requested the National Guard be put at his disposal for security of January 6th, he said no, because of optics. That's what Irving said. Irving's testimony later says, had he been aware of the intel that the FBI had that was not shared with him, that he would have said, yes, you're allowed to deploy the National Guard. Can you explain, was Paul Irving lying? Did he actually receive this intel and he's lying?
No, I'm not doubting Stephen Sund or Paul Irving's testimony that they didn't receive this report. I take them at face value that they didn't. But the report that's constantly cited by Sund is this January 5th one. It's the one that everyone points to. And that one, without any possible refutation, was actually sent to the Capitol Police. And it transferred one time to within the Capitol Police to the head of the Intelligence Division. This wasn't some coffee person. It was the head of the Intelligence Division. And you have to, in order to explain that for your conspiracy, she's in on it too.
She's definitely. Because you want to talk about her for a minute?
And so is Miller too. So is Miller.
You want
to McCarthy? So are all these people? Is on it?
Let's talk about.
Is Bowser in on it? Is Pelosi?
You want to talk about Yolanda?
Can you list everyone who's in on it first?
Right. I understand the straw man. So let's talk one specific, Yolanda Pittman. So would you say that then, because Yolanda Pittman, let's say she's operating in good faith, so she gets this and she never discloses it, right?
Bad thing to do.
Bad thing. Not only that, when there was a call to action from Stun and all hands on deck, for some reason, the days of January 6th, she sent 2/3 of the intelligence people home. There was only one intelligence person working under her the day of January 6th. You aware of that?
I'm aware of that, but you're aware that how you represented it isn't 2/3 of all the Capitol Police Department.
No, the intelligence.
It's specifically of the intelligence department.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's what I said. That's what she was tasked with, being in charge of the town. So you would say that at the very least, yeah, and you also agree that the Democrats are very concerned about January 6th, and they want to not just go. It's not just about getting Trump. They want to find out what the failures were and things like that.
Of course, we're all interested in that, Rob.
Okay, so can you explain the following? Mm-hmm. Why then did Nancy Pelosi on January 7th call for the resignation of Stephen Sund and then personally try to promote Yolanda Pittman, who by any objective measure is more culpable? And then let's continue. And then not only was she attempted to be promoted, but then she got another job. You know where? Right in Nancy Pelosi's district as the police chief at Berkeley. And then she was given please. Okay. Then during that time, right? During that time, she was allowed to continue to work at the Capitol Police, even though their department regulations said you couldn't take another job unless you intended to come back, which they didn't.
We all watched the testimony.
We did watch the testimony. So can you explain why Nancy Pelosi favored her but went after Sund if it's really about holding people accountable?
So there's this thing called personal responsibility, Rob, and you might not be aware of it because you never talk about Donald Trump's key and obvious failure here and there's no answer for his failure to not even drop a comment. Hey, can I give
nice deflection? Got it.
Just to be clear, but in this world of jobs, if some horrific situation happens, sometimes people at the top get canned. He wasn't the only one who got canned. Irving got canned. Everyone who was involved in the defense of the Capitol in respect to the top people, they got shit canned. Sorry to say, the DOD people were leaving anyway because it was the new administration, but them's just the facts. Is it a little bit unfair to Sund? I'm even willing to say maybe it's a little unfair to Sund. He seemed to be one of the only people who had some foresight here and was like really, really pushing, which makes it even worse that, and I do not say the DOD is free from culpability here. I just don't think that you've alleged a conspiracy of the FBI. And that's what you're trying to prove here, Rob. You're trying to prove a conspiracy. They intended this to happen. They intended the insurrection, or sorry, the non-insurrection.
Okay, so you notice something clever that happened there. He says something that might, in a vacuum, see something that could seem reasonable. He says, well, sometimes when a bad thing happens, the person at top gets the axe or gets the blame, even if they're not responsible. Let's say that I accept that for a moment and say, yeah, that could be the case. That doesn't explain why Yolanda Pittman, who even by Pisco's admission has more culpability than Stephen Sun, was given preferential treatment specifically by Nancy Pelosi. So, okay, maybe we can say, well, Sun unfortunately gets the axe because he was the top guy. But Yolanda Pittman, who failed spectacularly, way worse than Sun. Do you admit that, right? She failed way worse than Sun.
When did that come out, Rob? When's the timeline on this? When did information come up? Just so you know, she was universally rejected to keep the job in a permanent position.
Right.
And so
because people in the department didn't.
What you're saying is from innuendo, you're saying because she was promoted, she was a senior person in the Capitol City Police. That doesn't seem strange to me in a vacuum either. And then she was not allowed to keep her job. That seems fair given the failure of bringing forth.
So this is another.
That all seems. Wait, hang on. You're taking from that innuendo. Nancy's in on it. Nancy's in on it. She must be, right? Because Nancy wanted this to happen. Nancy Pelosi wanted January 6th to occur. Yes. And your evidence for that is what?
Yeah, we'll talk more about it. So just to put a pin on this, right? Like, so it was known, Sun was talking almost immediately after January 6th when he got canned and he started to look into this. This was known within a week or two that when people started asking questions, which you agree, people started asking questions immediately. Why wasn't there intel? So it was almost immediately known that Yolanda Pittman received some sort of intel, not the complete intel or anything like that.
But I sent that information. You can't get away from that.
Well, I already said that information that was sent when Sun's talk. Listen, again,
that's good, right? They're good.
Please, if you stop interrupting, I'll let you know, right? The information that you're talking about that was sent that said that there could be a battle and bloodshed with protesters is different than the evidence that the Sun was talking about and Irving was talking about. That was if there was evidence that there was about to be attack on Congress people and on the police, that would have triggered an increased security.
Sun cites that specifically and says, if I had known that, I didn't know that. They didn't tell me this report. I was aware of it.
Yes or no? Does Sun also talk about their intelligence
stuff that have come out? There's a bunch of stuff that have come out recently. There's a Secret Service threat assessment. There's a bunch of threat assessments. There was an intelligence failure. There was an action failure here. I do not deny that. The DOD's response time was abysmal, but you're alleging a conspiracy that they wanted it. And that requires a high level of evidence. And you haven't demonstrated that.
So again, what Pisco has to articulate to you is why the FBI, of course, right? It's still important to hear that there are people planning to clash with other protesters and possibly harm them. That's important, and that could affect the amount of security you would have. But they also had evidence, they're claiming now, that they were going to try to kill Mike Pence, that they were going to try to kill the police. Right.
As I recall, they're saying if Mike doesn't do what if Mike doesn't do
thank you. Okay, it doesn't matter. So there were threats on Mike Pence's lives. There were threats on the Capitol Police, and you're not arguing that information was ever sent, correct?
I just went down this one track. We can follow the allegation from many of these agencies is that they did send out these threat assessments, and now the GAO. That's not you.
You said one, and you said what it was.
So there are others, right? So if you go to the GAO report, this is a report released in 2023, February 2023. It's titled "Federal Agencies Identified Some Threats, but Did Not Fully Process and Share Information Prior to January 6th." You can go to that report, and it lays out all the agencies, like 10 plus agencies, some of which had credible threat assessments, some that didn't have credible threat assessments, and it lays out all these reports.
Okay, so
I followed on one thread. If you really want to get into the weeds and go through every single one, we can.
So just to say, if you're just picture it's you're running security. Yeah, you would want increased security if there's going to be clashes against protesters. It's a completely different game if you think they're going to kill Congress people or the vice president. And they are now claiming that they had intel that suggested that, but they weren't sharing it. And they had the head of the FBI that there's no excuse for him not having that intel if his departments had it, and they thought it was so important it was going to be an insurrection, and they had.
Wait, why is that? Why is that, Rob? Why is there no excuse for him not having it?
There's no excuse because they literally, if you were an FBI agent,
that question?
Please, yes, I will answer that question. And notice how to answer that question, if you have agents that are embedded in organizations and you are getting information that there is a specific time and a specific day where you know the president's going to be there and there's going to be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and you have specific information that's so important that you're later using to prosecute people and send them to prison for 20 years, that say they're going to specifically kill police officers, they're going to specifically kill Mike Pence, and you're like, I'm not going to kick that up the chain of command. I'll just keep it under hat. The leaders of the FBI don't need to know that.
So you expect the heads of agencies to know critical information?
I expect if your agency's sole
Not
purpose,
a yes or no.
I'm answering, right? I understand. If there's videotape evidence, will you say yes or no? Of course not. So don't try to play this
the Bowman thing again.
So what I'm answering. So it's different. What you're trying to do is be like, oh, therefore Trump should know everything the FBI knows and everything security. That's absurd. The difference between an executive that's over, please let me finish. The difference between an executive that's in charge of like 30 different branches, we clearly know that they don't know what's going on the ground situation with things like that. However, if you're the FBI and one of your central jobs is providing intelligence for the protection of our country and the leaders of our country, and you get credible evidence that there's going to be an attack on the leaders of our country, an attempt to overthrow the government, and the only information you put out is, please, I understand the need to erupt when you're getting blown out. I get it. I understand the need to interrupt when you're getting blown out. And you choose to say, well, we don't think that's important to kick up. But then later, after January 6th, you're like, oh, this is super important. We're going to use it to prosecute all these people.
I didn't hear anything you said. There's a tech thing. Something happened with my outside.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. You want me to repeat it?
Yes.
Is that what you're asking? Okay.
That's what I'm asking for.
So again, if you're specifically, it's different to be Donald Trump and you're in charge of all these other agencies. Everyone understands you're not into the tactical minutia of everything that's being said. Though there is an argument that the FBI should have reached out to Trump and told him that there was evidence that people that were his supporters were going to try to kill Mike Pence, which there's no evidence they ever did. But nonetheless, that's different than being the leader of the FBI. So picture that you're someone who's in charge of confidential human sources embedded in the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. And you think you're calling them domestic terrorists. In fact, Stephen Sund said that the FBI later testified that they had intelligence that 19 people on the domestic terror list were going to be there. Another thing that wasn't relayed to them. So you think these important people are so important that you've designated them domestic terrorists. You've embedded people in these organizations. You have evidence that they're planning to overthrow the government and kill Congress people. But you don't tell the Capitol Police, and your excuse is, well, the reason that they didn't tell the Capitol Police is because the leaders of the FBI didn't know. Then the question becomes, then why didn't these agents kick it up to the top of the FBI that they had this specific evidence?
Yeah, so your assumption is that they did not share any of this information. They shared some of the information.
Prove it.
And how? So, well,
you give one example.
So you can't deal with that example because that example absolutely crushes your argument.
It does not.
Okay, then explain. Why are they making threat assessments at all? Why are they sharing it all with Capitol Police if they want it to happen?
I mean, that's so stupid. It's an argument that you always see with people that are making excuses for corruption. They say, well, they always could have been more corrupt, so that's proof that corruption couldn't happen. Because it was reasonable. Let me ask you this.
Did you Goldilocks corruption? It's just corrupt enough.
No, that's not it. Do you think
regular threat assessments, they're having this dialogue?
It's just so dumb. Because, do you think it would have looked even worse for the FBI if people said, okay, what assessments do you have? And they said, we didn't do any assessments. You think that would have looked even worse for them afterwards?
Well, they're going to say we didn't find anything credible.
No, and I could prove that what they did was actually a sufficient plan because hacks like you then say, oh, well, the fact that they didn't
deniability. They're doing enough threat assessments. They're doing enough threat assessments.
I understand.
All right. Stop. Hang on. Stop. I've got to bring some sanity back in here. Okay. Pisco, we're going to start with you. Okay. You can go ahead with your rejoinder. And then we'll move over to Rob, but you guys, it just went too off the rails there. I don't mind a little bit of interruption. Don't mind a little bit of sparring. I think that's good, but it's too much. Go ahead, Pisco.
Yeah, the Goldilocks problems of corruption. What he's essentially he's saying is they're doing these threat assessments and they're sending them to the Capitol Police for plausible deniability. So later on, they don't get screwed, or later on, they don't get as much oversight in what Rob considers to be fake investigations and slaps on the wrist anyway. And investigations where he thinks that they look already horrible, right? Like any IG report that he points to, he always says a smoking gun of corruption anyway. And so, what is the point of doing this credible threat assessment and sending at least some to the Capitol Police and being engaged in this process and embedding people in these various organizations and sending some information, if you're totally corrupt, might as well just not give any threat assessments. I mean, if you're sending threat assessments, maybe it leaks, maybe it gets sent up the chain. Once you leave that information, leaves the possession of the DOJ, who knows where it goes?
Okay, so you can see the sleight of hand here. He can't give any answer whatsoever why FBI agents would have this critical information that of terrorists that were supposed to be there and all this stuff that they thought were so important that they were embedded with, but somehow didn't kick that information over. Now, I'd like to talk about, you mentioned Nancy Pelosi specifically. Stephen Sum testified that on January 3rd, he requested, so he, for USC 1970, the guy who's tasked with the tactical on-the-ground defense, in order to get the National Guard, legally, he has to have the Capitol Police Board request that from the Sergeant of Arms, correct? That's the only way he could request the National Guard?
That's the only way he can request the National Guard.
Yes, okay. So that's what he attempted to do. So your claim that no one requested the Guard is untrue. Son requested the Guard, correct?
Stop. You're lying right now. What I said is prior to January 6th, who was the only request that the DOD received for an RFA?
Maybe I misheard you. Fine.
So the only one who had an RFA at all, and it was asked multiple times in roundtable calls, DOJ, DHS, Marshal Services, Park Police, all these organizations, the only one who requested anything was Mayor Bowser.
Bowser requested people that would National Guard, not for protection of the Capitol, but requested them to deal with traffic. When Donald Trump, and it's in the documents of the timeline that you can see, suggested that 10,000 Guard troops be deployed, which he did say to protect his own people, Bowser put a memo saying she didn't want that. That memo exists that Bowser said she didn't want that, correct?
News. So
that's fake news? That's
what you're saying is fake news. You're acting as though Bowser was responding to a specific offer or a floated idea by Donald Trump. You know that was the implication of what you said, and there's no evidence whatsoever that was, first of all, even an idea that Donald Trump had. Miller has said that he, under no circumstances, had he ever given an offer for that. In fact, Miller was actively resisting any DOD involvement in the initial stages. He almost rejected Mayor Bowser's RFA for like 300 people to control.
Bowser, I just want to ask you.
It beggars belief, to use your phrase, it beggars belief that an offer was sent, and there's no evidence of it, Rob. And what you just did was you acted as though there was a responsive communique from Mayor Bowser rejecting Trump's offer or floated idea, which is absurd and not at all evidenced by facts and reality.
Did Bowser put a memo out that's been released denying some sort of
December 31st? The initial RFA was sent. There was a second RFA that was sent as well from a different from the chief, I believe, of the Metropolitan Police, and the RFA was actually changed and tightened by the Department of Defense later on, and they put more restrictions.
Did Bowser? That's all good. Did Bowser send a memo? Did Bowser send a memo denying that?
Yeah. No. Wait. Did Bowser? You just said. Did Bowser send memos denying that?
Suggesting she didn't know.
Denying what? Denying what?
The RFA that was sent, the specific request for the National Guard in the way that it was asked to be deployed.
Wait. Bowser made a request. Bowser didn't make a denial. What are you talking about?
So you're saying Bowser, so I'm going to look for this. There's not a memo of Bowser that was ever sent saying she didn't want the National Guard deployed for security.
No. As part of her RFA, and later on reaffirming that this is the request we want, this is all that we need right now, and any additional support, please let us know and involve us in the process. That is not denying a request or denying an offer. You must agree with that, Rob. Do you agree that's not denying?
I agree. I'm asking you specifically what that memo said. That memo, again, I know, I haven't read it for a while. I know one of the things that memo suggested was that the Guard only be used for traffic, not for riot control or anything like that. Did that memo specifically say from Bowser she didn't want the Guard to be deployed for riot control and things of that nature?
That was in the initial RFA and was made further evident by Miller's specific tightening. Wait. Why are you shaking your head?
Was Bowser again? I'm just asking you. I'm asking you.
Wait, I'm
asking you. You just asked me a question. I'll answer. I'm shaking my head because I'm just merely asking you. Did Bowser put in writing at some point that she didn't want them used for security and things of that nature? She didn't want them used for the task of the initial RFA.
In the initial RFA, it was always envisioned that this was going to be the deployment, the RFA. Okay, and later on, the DoD made more tightening, and they removed riot helmets, and they said that, in order for us to be activated, there was a quick response force as well that needed specific authorization from him and from McCarthy.
So can I clarify? See what you're saying?
Why are you interrupting me? You clearly don't understand.
Because I don't. That's why I'm interrupting you. Because I don't. Because you're right. So you're saying there was initial RFA that suggested using the National Guard for more of a security type way.
No.
Okay, so then my question, then I don't understand the answer that you're giving. Your answer would be real simple. I would say, did Bowser ever say that she didn't want security to be used or National Guard to be used as security? You would say no. That would be the end of the answer. But you then instead go, well, the initial RFA that needed to get tightened, I'm just asking you, did she put on writing? Is it your interpretation that she put in writing that she, at some point, regardless if it was the initial RFA that she was against or the second RFA, did she put in writing at some point, I don't want the National Guard for security? Did she do that?
They wanted it for traffic control and for specifically for certain counterterrorism things and for the exits, the egresses from various subway places.
Okay,
that's what was the.
So you can see. So it took us.
Hang on a second. So the default assumption is not DC National Guard involvement. That's not the default assumption, Rob. The default assumption is non-involvement, as you're well aware, and as was the case. The Department of Defense. Anyone who's part of the military would understand this. That they're usually not the first ones to go to, and you want to exhaust civilian enforcement authorities before you go to the DoD. So there was no offer given to Bowser that she rejected. That's what you were trying to, by implication, say that she rejected it. She was the only one who made a request before January 6th, and that's just reality.
So you can see that's not what I was trying to do. Trump said as an offhand comment, we should have 10,000 guard there. They said, no, that would be bad, right? Mayor Bowser, please.
Hang on, Pisco, let him respond.
Right? So he made that comment. It's in the official timeline. Do you deny he made that comment? Yes or no would be sufficient.
I deny he made that comment to Bowser.
Oh, I didn't say he made that comment to Bowser.
I deny the second. I deny the second. I deny what you just said is they said someone said no, right? Someone said
it's unfortunate that I tried to interrupt. Now I'm just going to talk over you now. I'm just going to talk over
enough. Hang on. Stop. Let Rob have the floor. Pisco, you still have had much more speaking time than Rob has. And I understand that debates aren't about the fairness of speaking time, but for the sake of this, I'm going to let Rob have the floor. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, and so what happens is he talks at great length, and then I'm trying to have a back and forth, so I ask a question, and he just keeps expanding. It's very simple. He made it sound like, well, actually, Bowser wanted the National Guard there. It was literally just for traffic. That's what she requested it for. She didn't want it there for security purposes. Trump did say as an offhand comment, I'm not saying that he put pen to paper or that Mario Bowser what he said, but he did suggest that 10,000 National Guard be there for security-type purposes. Granted, he said it to protect his own people. But when we get down to brass tacks, the problem is, the way Pisco talks about this stuff, he knows that 90% of you haven't read the actual documents when it went on. So when he says only Bowser requested the National Guard from the DOD, what he's ignoring is that the person tasked tactically with the defense, Capitol Chief Sund, the only way he could request the National Guard is to go through the Sergeant of Arms. And the only person that the Sergeant of Arms answers to that's directly above him is Nancy Pelosi. And so he went to Paul Irving, and he said, Paul, on January 3rd, he said, I would like to have the National Guard be available. And Irving said, I don't like that because of optics. Can you explain to me why optics should come into consideration if it comes to keeping safe the people at the Capitol?
Yeah, so right there is the false framing. I 100% agree with you that in response to what was going on in January 6th, letting optics be your decision maker and whether or not to mobilize National Guard is absurd and absolutely a dereliction of duty. And I think that that's true. Regardless, that's true of the DOD, and the DOD failed us that day. And I don't believe their report, which says that everything is hunky dory. I'm not just someone who just accepts it. I think it's blatantly absurd that you could say that it's acceptable that the response time be like 5 or 6 hours. I'm not sitting here and being the best friend of the DOD. I think they're absolutely failures. But the optics considerations were a unanimous consensus before January 6th. In what you specifically reference, and for some reason, you only reference Irving. You understand the Capitol Police Board is made up of 3 voting members who are both secretaries
Stenger,
of arms.
Irving, and I forget the other guy's name.
So, I mean, why aren't you mentioning McConnell? I mean, that's just one question. Why aren't you mentioning the archivist?
Oh, I'll get to him.
Yeah. So in order
You
for
just
your
filibuster so we can't get the actual story.
in order
Go
for
ahead.
your stick to make sense,
Mhm.
you need to allege a totalizing conspiracy among every actor in the lead up to January 6th. This includes
I don't need to.
the DOD who were concerned about optics, the DOJ was concerned about optics, and the reason they was, hey, we have this president of the United States who's alleging that the election is stolen, and we want to distance the military.
Tighten it up, Pisco. Tighten it up.
On certification, and in the context of the Black Lives Matter incidents that happened there. That to me is a reasonable consideration if there's no huge threat assessment, but obviously it shouldn't.
Okay, so continuing with what happened. So there was a request from the National Guard, which you wouldn't have known listening to Pisco, where he said the way.
No,
please, I'm not going to let you interrupt me again. I'm sorry. I think you're filibustering again. We still have a lot of important things to get to. So here's what Stephen Sun testified to. He said that initially Irving, the sergeant at arms under Pelosi, said, "Nah, I don't like this for optics. Go talk to Stenger." Now, Stenger is the sergeant of arms under McConnell. And so he goes and tries to talk to Stenger. That moment, he's not there. He comes back a couple hours later and he says, "Hey, how about the National Guard?" And he was surprised at how quick Stenger's answer was. Stenger's answer almost immediately was, "You should call Walker." Now, Walker is the guy that's in charge of the National Guard. And Sun says, I thought that was odd that he had that answer that fast. And of course, he knows just calling Walker doesn't do anything because the law says that he needs permission from one of the people on the board, which are the sergeant of arms. You want to know what Sun testified to in his September? See what you think about that. So this is clearly Nancy Pelosi, right, not wanting the Guard, correct?
Everyone, first of all, there's no evidence whatsoever of communications made by Irving to Pelosi. What you are relying on are the suppositions and assumptions. You don't even allege that there's any specific communication made by Nancy Pelosi to anyone else. You're just assuming it. You weren't there. You have no idea what was said or wasn't said between the Speaker at Arms or Nancy Pelosi, and you're just assuming it, Rob. What was said? You tell us.
You want me to tell you what was testified was said?
By Sun? By whom?
By Sun, that Stenger told him.
Did Sun talk to Pelosi? Was Sun there?
What does that have? Sun tossed to Stenger tossed to Irving, and it said, let me see if I can find this. I thought I had this highlighted.
We're now relying, because I know what it said. And
what did it say? Go ahead. It's weird you're not just telling people. Here's what he testified in his testimony at 53 minutes and 5 seconds. He said, send him over okay when you met with Stenger. Had Irvin giving him a heads up that you were there for the National Guard? And this is what Sun testifies to. Yeah, later on, after January specific, on April 8th, I had lunch with Mike Stenger, and I asked him, because it was unusual that he came up with the idea so quickly when I went walking in, and I asked him, and I said, Mr. Stenger, you came up with that response fairly quickly for me to call the general. And he told me that Paul Irving had called him ahead of time and said, Sun came in here looking for the National Guard, asking for the National Guard. We got to come up with another plan because Pelosi will never go for it. And that floored me.
So to be 100% clear, in your very own hearsay statement, right? In that hearsay statement, there is not a single communication alleged between Irving and Pelosi. Even taking the hearsay as actual proof and evidence, at most, what it shows is Irving's assumptions about Pelosi and what she will go for and what she won't go for. Rob, do you think that that's enough evidence to show that any specific communication was made between Irving and Pelosi, or Pelosi was involved in any way in the decision-making not to involve the DC National Guard?
Okay, two things. One,
yes,
I think it's enough circumstantial. Would you agree with this? It's enough circumstantial to subpoena Pelosi and Irving and ask what the conversations potentially were and get their phone records?
I think you should subpoena Irving. And why didn't the Republicans subpoena Irving?
Well, they did. They plan on subpoenaing him in the news committee. Real quick. That's interesting. It's interesting because we'll get to this in a minute, right? There's still so much to get to, right? But it's interesting you say that because the January 6th committee that was very concerned about this, they didn't subpoena Sun. They didn't subpoena the people that were like the primary people responsible for defense. They didn't do it.
Hang on a second. You know for a fact that these defense individuals, people in charge, were brought in front of both the House and the Senate prior to the select committee's investigation. And so what you're saying now is that there was a need, and I agree that for additional fact finding about the response here, and that fact finding happened in the DOD, but we need more fact finding, I think, because there's clear contradiction in the record between Irving and Sund and Stinger. I think Stinger is actually dead now.
He is.
But yeah, regardless.
Killed by those fucking Pelosi people. I'm just fucking around.
Okay. Well,
I don't know how he died, but he did pass away.
The Republicans had an opportunity to bring Irving in, and they didn't. And they didn't.
Republicans had the opportunity.
Who has the burden of proof? You're alleging a conspiracy.
Please. Republicans had the opportunity to not pass massive spending bills, and there's shit on that as well. Now, when we go to after January 6th, once things start to occur, right? Now, again, Sund is the person on the ground that has the most tactical knowledge of what's going on, that's primarily tasked with defending the Capitol grounds. At 12:57, he starts to call Paul Irving, because you agree with this, right? He needs to get one of the sergeant-at-arms to give him the go-ahead to request the National Guard.
For the request, yes.
Okay, right. So this guy's saying, shit, I need the National Guard. He calls Paul Irving. Now, Irving says, I didn't get a call until 2, but General Sund, or
Captain 1:30. He came down to 1:30.
Captain Sund says, no, that's not true. Here's my phone records. I called him 11 times. He says he called Irving, who again answers to Nancy Pelosi, and he said, we need the National Guard. We're getting our ass kicked. And Irving said, and I'm quoting, this is the guy that initially said, that we have that said, he called Stenger, which is inappropriate in the first place, and said, oh, Sund's going to come ask for the National Guard. Don't say yes. Pelosi wouldn't like it. So even if he didn't personally talk to Pelosi, it's inappropriate what he's doing anyways. And then that guy on the day of January 6th, once he's getting a specific request, now it's all out the window. Now we can see that it's starting to get violent. What does he tell Sund?
Guys, you're not going to like this, but we're out of time. We're actually out of time for the debate. We're an hour and 36 minutes in. By the time we get through the closing statements, move on to callers and super chats, we're gonna be here for a while. So it's because it seemed like it was really short, because that first 30 minutes took up a big block. So
agreed. But listen, Rob made a commitment that he would do that first in the next time we talked, and so I credit him for being true to his word.
Yeah.
We're at 10:41 time wise. So I actually do have to.
Statements, or
of course, you're gonna get your full closings, everything. So if you guys want to call, I know nobody's fucking happy because it's such a broad topic, right? You always think 3 hours is gonna be enough to get everything in, but it goes faster than you think. So, real quick, guys, if you're gonna call in, now's the time to do it. I'm going to go ahead and open the floor up for callers soon. But first, I'm going to give these guys their closing statements. Now, Pisco's going to go first. Rob's going to get the last word as the opening was reversed. So, Pisco, you have 7 minutes on the clock for your closing statement.
Awesome.
Go ahead. Go ahead when you're ready.
I don't think that conspiracies are impossible to prove. They're possible to prove. And you can allege small-scale conspiracies, large-scale conspiracies. I'm certain that conspiracies have happened in the past, and there has been malfeasance and criminality. And even in some of Rob's favorite topics, like Burisma and in the Russia investigation, there are instances of criminality and bad conduct, misconduct, and outright malfeasance. And so I don't think it's an impossible standard. But he has to provide more than just assumptions and innuendos, and really just, I think, cobbled together. Isn't it weird? Because that's basically what you got. He has to have an explanation for why the FBI is just sort of passing along information, not perfectly. Where the obvious, I think, response is like, well, it's a big agency, things fall through the cracks. That's just true, and you don't like to hear it, but that is true. And they identified in various reports intelligence failures. But if you don't have specific evidence of willful intent and really kind of like a brainiac-like foresight to bring martial people to be insurrectionists in the Capitol, I don't think that you've done enough to make your case that January 6th was brought about by these intelligence agencies and these other individuals. Everyone kind of has to be in on it, right? Pelosi kind of has to be in on it. Irving has to be in on it. I guess McConnell has to be in on it. The Department of Defense definitely has to be in on it. And I don't even think that you would deny it. But asking you to fully chart out the network of players who are corrupt and wanted this to happen. I mean, I really challenge you to identify by name everyone that you think was part of this criminal conspiracy. And really, your so what story comes out to isn't the obvious answer that they wanted this to happen? Is it any more credible than the other kind of so what story, which is maybe they wanted, at least the Department of Defense situation, they wanted Trump to remain in power and they wanted to help the insurrectionists? Why is that less credible than your story? To be clear, I don't think there's sufficient evidence to show that either. I think that for what there is sufficient evidence for is that Trump was derelict in his duty. Trump brought all these people here. Trump is in charge of all these agencies, except for the Capitol Police, the specific ones sort of in charge of Congress. But in terms of the DOD, the DOJ, the federal agencies, Trump's in charge of everyone. He brought everyone here, and he didn't even get on the phone to call Miller and McCarthy and say, hey, how can I help? Can I offer a tweet? Can I tell them all to get out of here, please? Like, what can I do? I want to help out. The Capitol's under attack. Who was he on the phone with? He was pressuring Congress people to try to overturn the results of the election. That shows to me what his state of mind was. It wasn't trying to help. And what's the assumption there? Well, Rob already told you in the discussion he had with Destiny. He told you if someone has the power to mobilize the National Guard, they see that Pence is under threat, they see that the Capitol is being invaded, and they do not act, they wanted that to happen. I don't go as far as necessarily Rob did. I think that there's more evidence required to show Trump's intent. It's not enough for him to be derelict, but Rob seems to have no castigation whatsoever for Trump. I haven't heard him say a bad word about Trump's response yet, and I doubt you'll hear him condemn Trump's lack of action and the lack of giving a call to McCarthy Miller. He probably says he didn't have to give a call. He could have stayed the whole time watching the TV, and he had no responsibility whatsoever. But we're going to imply all of this intent based on innuendo to the various agencies I already don't like and have it out against. And so ultimately, I just think that there isn't sufficient proof to prove your claim here, Rob. But there is sufficient proof to show that Trump, for all his faults and foibles that day, was clearly derelict in his duty to protect us and our capital.
Okay, Rob, you have 7 minutes. Pisco, you still had 3, but that's all right.
I'll take
Rob,
his 3.
you have 7 minutes on the clock. Go ahead when you're ready.
So I will give Pisco credit for this. He's very good at running out the clock, and that's usually how these debates go. And you can see how it's like pulling teeth. He goes through all this minutia and stuff like that, so you can't really get to the heart. We didn't even get into anything like Ray Epps or Biggs' testimony that they have over 200 feds that were in the crowd and things like that. We don't get to any of that. I will finish the point I was saying. Both the day of, Irving, who was under Pelosi, said he had to run it up the chain of command. Then he lied to Congress and said, oh, I don't remember getting that call until like 1:30 or 2 or something like that, when actually Sun provided evidence that he called him 11 times and repeatedly was exacerbated. But somehow under Nancy Pelosi, the chain of command, as Sun admitted, that the only person above Irving, his chain of command, was Nancy Pelosi. So he said, I have to run it up the chain of command, which he meant I have to run it by Nancy Pelosi. And they waited and they waited and waited. And then finally, once they did get the order, he had to then make a request where he's on this phone call. And you have people in the Army like General Pyatt that's there. And Pyatt says, no, I don't think you should have the National Guard because of optics. And so ultimately, this is what it comes down to. We're looking at these competing interpretations. One, you could see the motive is there. You see how important the insurrection narrative is to the anti-Trump people, the Democrats, the establishment people. It has allowed them to have almost unprecedented powers to deploy the world's most powerful intel and law enforcement agents to go after their political opponents. It's a lot. Now we have Democrats suggesting over 120 Republicans should maybe be kicked off of ballots because they participated in insurrection. These are the same people that defended or ignored the actual violence that occurred all throughout the summer. Even May 30th, 2020, when we had actual lethal means being employed by Democrats trying to break into the White House. And again, why is that seen differently? Because there was adequate security there. So why wasn't there adequate security? And why does it seem like almost none of the Democrats are concerned with answering this question? They're just kind of like, well, people got fired. That's it. Anyways, Trump, 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 Trump. They're not concerned. And when we have the guy that was tasked with actually being the point person for the tactical security saying that there's basically 2 areas of problems, you have to answer what is the most likely scenario from these 2 things. Why were there massive groups? General Milley himself, who's clearly a Trump hater, who said he would call China to warn them if Trump ever decided to attack them, which is in itself a treasonous statement. That's how much Milley hated Trump. Milley was using Data Miner, a program that they have, to be able to get intelligence that he was then reporting to Democratic senators saying there's going to be an attack on the Capitol, they're going to try to kill people. But he didn't bother to take that information to the people that were tasked with defense. The Department of Homeland Security had this intelligence. They never sent it. The FBI, they sent one memo to Yolanda Pittman, who did nothing with it, right? That just said they might fight with protesters. It could get bloody, but withheld all of the evidence that said that they were going to try to have a coup or try to kill Mike Pence or et cetera, right? And now they're saying that evidence is super important when they're using it to go after people and with their insurrection narrative. But at the time, why didn't they give that evidence? Why was there an intelligence failure? And what Pisco wants you to believe is the same reason he wants you to believe that the FBI illegally got wiretaps to spy on Trump's team, or FISA warrant to spy on Trump's team, not the word wiretap. It's incompetence. That's what he'll always come up with. Career FBI people were aware that allegedly 19 people on their domestic terrorist list were coming, but they just didn't bother to tell anyone that was tasked with security. They just didn't bother to tell the higher ups at the FBI. Why? What he wants you to believe is, oh, it was just a failure. It was a boo-boo. It was a mistake. Or it could be that it was intentional. Do you think career people that legitimately think the government's about to be overthrown and there's going to be attack on Congress people's lives are going to say, I got an early tea time. I'm just not going to tell anyone about it. And then once we get, even if you believe that that's somehow the case, then when you get to the day of January 6th, once it becomes a riot and Sun at 12:57 is calling saying, okay, Sergeant at Arms under Pelosi, I need you to sign off on me requesting the guard. And he says, let me kick it up the chain. In other words, to Pelosi, I'll get back to you. And then it takes him 71 minutes to acquiesce to that request. Just right around the time there, a little after 2, where it's like all of a sudden they got the narrative they wanted. Oh boy, it's an insurrection. They're going into the Capitol. Right at that point, they're like, oh, okay, now we could say okay. And still though, at that point, when there's a call that Muriel Bowser was on and people from other agencies and Paeta, who's one of these guys high up at the Army. Paeta is the one that speaks up when Sun says, okay, now that we got permission from the National Arms, we need the National Guard. At 2:30, once they're already in the Capitol, and Paeta, this guy from the Army, who allegedly cares about this country, who wants the people to not be killed, doesn't want these violent insurrectionists to kill people, he says, I don't like it because of optics. Now, what kind of person would you have to be? Not some low-level person, but someone high up in the military whose number one task is protecting this country and the leaders of this country to say, I think that they're possibly going to be killed and the government's going to be overthrown, but I don't want to deploy the guard that's right there because of optics. When you start to factor in all these stuff and then the things that have come post then, right? How it doesn't seem like the after-action report that Pittman herself put together afterwards, that was praised and pushed to the moon, and even by Pelosi, even though she was the one that clearly failed the most of anyone at the Capitol Police, that just, I had this intelligence, there was about to be an insurrection. I just didn't share it. I felt like not sharing it, even though it was the job I was tasked for. And she gets promoted, right? The report they put together was 27 pages. If you look at the January 6th committee, almost none of it had anything to do with getting to the bottom of why was it that Sun's requesting this? Why was Paul Irving denying these requests? Why was Paeta denying these requests? What was going on? Why can't we figure out who the pipe bomber? All of these questions, it's like the legitimate security failures. It seems like all of a sudden the Democrats don't care. And why would they? They got the benefit. They're using this as weaponization. All it requires is a handful of people to engage in terrible acts when you have a mob situation that would then propel it to get out of control. If there's not adequate security and there's 30, 40,000 people, many as 100,000 that were there total, but that were going to the Capitol, it's clear to see how all you would have to do is have a handful of people that would get overran and you have your narrative. This was what was being set up. It is the most likely 5 minutes or 5 seconds.
You got about 30 seconds left.
Okay, cool. This is the most likely scenario. And what Pisco can't answer and Destiny can't answer, they have to defend, well, it was just bad, these people, it was incompetence. And yeah, the Democrats aren't really that interested in trying to get to the bottom of it. And yeah, the wrong people were promoted. So I hope in the audience questioning, we get to some Ray Epps stuff because I'd love to talk about it. But that's the crux of what's going on here. As always, Pisco will say the same FBI that Chuck Schumer warned us would find 6 ways from Sunday of getting back at Trump, that have constantly for 7 years gone after Trump and the people connected to him over and over and over. It's always just incompetence. That's all it is.
All right, guys, thank you so much. Now, Pisco, it's your first time here, so you probably have never heard these words, but so many others have. We do things a little bit differently here on the Crucible. So when the debate is done, that doesn't actually mean that there's not going to be any more debating. It means that the moderator can participate with his own questions. I have some that I've written down. Also means that we're going to move over to callers. We fully expect you guys to continue to spar over perhaps super chats or when the callers call in. That's perfectly acceptable. That's just kind of the way it goes. So kind of let's start with my questions because as you may know, Pisco, I disagree with you heavily on some of this, though I have some questions for Rob as well. Can we start with the idea of insurrection as it is? Why is it that you think that the Whiskey Rebellion was an insurrection instead of a rebellion?
So the Whiskey Rebellion was also known as the Whiskey Insurrection.
Yeah, but no, it's not. It's not known as the Whiskey Insurrection. It's known as the Whiskey Rebellion. Where did you get the term Whiskey Insurrection? I've been trying to figure this out.
So at the time that the Whiskey Rebellion, that this insurrection occurred, it was referred to contemporaneously by writers at the time and who praised the Commander-in-Chief George Washington and the new Constitution and its vigor. They referred to it as insurrection.
Was anybody ever prosecuted for insurrection?
I think some people were hanged. I'm not sure about
for what.
The Insurrection Act, as it currently exists today, isn't the same as it was.
Right. So all you're doing is appealing to what some people colloquially called it then an insurrection. So how come when Rob said that his definition of insurrection was based around how people might colloquially perceive an insurrection, why do you reference this as being a primary to your source for what an insurrection is, people colloquially referring to it at the era? Why would Rob's definition be wrong?
Because when we're using terms insurrection for purposes of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, what we're taught is that the original public meaning at the time of enactment is the most critical definition. That is, you use the definitions and meanings of the provisions at the time they were written so as to not import your biases from the current day.
But isn't it true that there's no actual definition for what insurrection is inside of any federal code anywhere?
I don't know what you mean by that. You mean the criminal code?
No, I'm saying that the Constitution, as it outlines insurrection, does not define what that is.
Correct. That is correct.
Yeah, it does not define what that is. So it's going to be left to the Supreme Court to decide what that is ultimately.
True. Yeah.
So if that's true, then all we're really doing is still colloquially referring to it as this thing because it still has not been defined. And when you use your definition, you say specifically this needs to include the Whiskey Rebellion because colloquially at the time, it was referred to as an insurrection, but it was not referred to by the government as an insurrection, but as rebellion. So how can you square that when Rob says, wait a second, I'm doing the exact same thing you are, Pisco?
Yeah, so like for any category of thing, there's going to be margin cases, easy cases, hard cases. Everyone knows that, right? And I'm fairly sure that you guys are familiar with these definitions, with white, black. You guys have debated about this kind of thing.
Those
before.
Are heuristics.
But the thing about like insurrection at the margin.
Wait. No. Those are heuristics.
Okay, can you?
Insurrection's not a heuristic.
Okay, so there is an all-purpose definition of white.
There's no all-purpose definition for any word on planet Earth.
Okay, that's my point, right?
No, that's a non-point
for words, in my opinion. Oh, do you want my response? Or you can tell me what you think.
But that's a non-point.
In my opinion, words have meaning based on often their usage. I agree with that at base. But what do you?
Well, then Rob was right when he said that his definition's colloquial.
Hang on. That would mean, right? Would you ever accept someone saying, well, man means whatever I want man to mean, or women means whatever I want mean, because 51% of the population says that women means this? You would.
You would. You would.
No,
I'm kidding though. Hang on, Rob.
Do you mind if I?
Nope. I do.
Please,
it's my turn for inquiry. It's my turn for inquiry.
Can I ask just really quick, Pisco? Can you tell us the definition the Colorado court used for insurrection?
Yeah, for sure.
Which one did they use?
No, so they have a bunch of dictionary definitions, and part of. Okay, guys, if you
go ahead, you know the answer. You know how you fucked up here.
Philosophy is extracting meaning. They have to come up with some rule, right? Some test because they have a case in front of them that they have to decide one way or the other. And they can't just be like, well, I don't know what insurrection means. I'm just going to throw my hands up in the air because there's a word in the Constitution that says insurrection. And so they have to do their
But
best.
it's not defined.
But please,
okay,
if I can real quick. But Pisco, I
so what do we do? Do we ignore,
this is what you do the whole debate. Can you just tell the audience the truth? What was the definition that they ultimately went with?
They developed their own, right? They developed. They
didn't. What was it? Go ahead. Tell me what their definition.
You're not going to find. This is a legal test. An insurrection, as used in Section 3, it's a legal test.
Let me, if I could, because Pisco won't answer, I'll tell you, because we've had this conversation. They didn't actually say this is how we're defining insurrection.
I'm talking about
but they said, please, you can tell me if I'm wrong. They said, here are possible definitions of the term insurrection. We are choosing not to define the term insurrection.
Well, let's just grant that they did.
Well, but we think that these things that Donald Trump did would meet any definition of it, correct?
Right. But even if we granted it, even if we granted his definition, would be irrelevant because he's actually deferring to your definition.
Well,
so ultimately, what Pisco is saying here is the reason that I go with this, because I asked him specifically the cause earlier in the debate so that the audience knew, and I made sure to take a note. He said the reason I'm going with this Colorado statute for what it is because it includes and defines things that he believes captures the spirit of what insurrection is, which includes the Whiskey Rebellion. When asking him why the Whiskey Rebellion, he's referring to it as an insurrection at all. He says, because colloquially at the time, that's how some writers referred to it. Rob says, but colloquially here, since it's not defined, I'm trying to go with how most people would see it.
So laws, especially constitutional provisions, are public facing documents. Okay. They need to be interpreted not just by legal people, but by the public at large to help define their conduct and for help their understanding and order their lives.
No one's disagreeing.
Okay, so totally agree with that.
I'm granting all of this.
The push for originalism and for textualism that's tailored to the time of enactment is done to prevent the over broadening or the completely changing.
That wasn't done in this case.
Okay, so what we're talking about here with Rob's definition, he is narrowing insurrection.
Yeah, but you're broadening it.
I think that what my version of insurrection, when I'm hearkening back to the usage and original public meaning of the term that existed when it was enacted in 1868.
Well, that's just because some people refer to it that way.
Yeah, but I'm referring to those specific incidents because those were what was considered by the people who enacted that text. And why shouldn't that be relevant to defining the word today?
I just want 15 seconds and I'm done.
Go ahead,
because
Rob.
I promise.
Go ahead.
Again, if he says that my definition that was basically serious attempts to overthrow a group of people seriously attempting to overthrow the government, he says, no, that's no good. You need a specific definition. The court literally took my approach. They literally didn't give a specific definition. They were just like, well, we think a massive armed group of people trying to overthrow the government.
It's like porn, right? It's like porn, when you see it.
So he defends the Supreme Court not specifically, or the Colorado court not specifically defining it, but says that I can't say that.
Rob, when we're talking about definitions and giving each other's definitions, I totally think that it's important for us to be willing or not willing to cement ourselves to a particular definition.
I did.
Okay. That definition as a minimum category, I agree with you that insurrection would encompass that circle of things. My contention is, as originally understood, those words encompassed conduct greater than that. And
no, that's not actually your argument. Your argument is that some people in this time era who wrote newspapers refer to it as such.
Not just newspapers.
Well, then where's the law people who referred to insurrection defined it in this era?
So Webster's dictionary existed back then. Black's Law Dictionary existed back then.
Okay, so what's the definition of insurrection from the 18 something definition of insurrection?
I refer to an opinion. If you want me to go through the Supreme Court opinion where they reference all the definitions, we can. This is the problem with trying to interpret this word is there's definitions that differ slightly on what it means. And we as interpreters, as lawyers, we have to extract the core meanings of these words because otherwise the alternative is to not enforce this provision.
Okay, so here's what I have from Webster. This is from the year 1828. Insurrection arising against a civil political authority, the open and active opposition of a number of persons to the execution of a law in a city or state. It is the equivalent to sedition except that sedition expresses a less extreme rising of citizens. So it's giving a deference saying that if you're seditious to the state, right, that's a distinction between being violent towards the state. It differs from rebellion, for the latter expresses a revolt or an attempt to overthrow the government, to establish a different one, or to place the country under another jurisdiction. It differs from mutiny as it respects the civil or political government, whereas mutiny is an open opposition to the law, the army, the navy. Insurrection is, however, used with such latitude as to comprehend either sedition or rebellion. So
it's a broader term, right? What you just read
it's pretty broad. It's pretty broad.
I agree with that. So Rob definition of insurrection sounds more like rebellion, right?
It sounds like this.
But no, it doesn't, because insurrection, as you just read, right? That even that definition that you just read is broader than what the court is using here. What you just said is
what court?
The Colorado trial.
The Colorado trial court, which is not trying any of these people for insurrection.
Any of which people?
Any people who were involved in January 6th.
Okay, now you're talking about whether or not criminal procedures are required.
Well, no, what I'm saying is that if this definition,
that's a different question.
If this definition is applicable, right? I'm trying to be the most charitable that I possibly can be to this.
So whether or not
definitions from the era,
whether or not a criminal trial is necessary is a different question than what the word means. Like we could say that a criminal trial is required for all these, and also agree with the definition.
Yeah, but I'm granting that too. So I'm granting the entirety. So listen carefully to what I'm saying.
Sure.
Saying that if I'm the most charitable, and I say, wait a second, in this particular case, they're still not really telling you here, in this is from 1828, what this actually entails. So it seems like it's going to be broadly left up to kind of public perspective here. And so if we're coming down to nuance, that would be a colloquialism, how people think an insurrection is. How else could it be anything other than that?
If you're making reference to new phenomena that didn't exist at the time of when these words were enacted, I can understand you having to carry forward some articulable principle from before and applying them to the new situation. However, we have to find some way to interpret this word, Andrew, and because this is part of the Constitution. And
so then what's the problem with him saying that he requires them to be armed?
Right. Because so how would we know that insurrection doesn't necessarily require that? Well, wouldn't we look to what people who enacted these provisions thought insurrection required?
Sure, I'll go with that. Yeah, can you give me an example of an insurrection where everybody was unarmed?
Hang on, with guns, these people were in January 6th. People were armed. What Rob is saying is that
what were they armed with? What were they armed with? Pepper spray.
Hang on,
a guy found zip ties. They had spears. Oh wait, those are flags.
Hang on a second. So
they didn't even have axe handles. Like what do you like era-specific weapons. They didn't even have anything as sophisticated as an axe handle.
They had airsoft weapons. They had bludgeoned weapons. You know they did. Wait, hang on a second. Do you deny
any of that? I deny it. Yeah, I deny it.
But
no, wait. I know. Hang on. Yes, I deny that January 6th protesters, by and large, almost none of them had any weapons. And even if some did, if I granted you that even some did,
at least one person have it.
It doesn't. I don't think that even if just one person shows up to a protest with a weapon, it becomes an insurrection.
Okay, what you're doing, right?
I have a piercing weapon here. Look at this piercing weapon that I have.
What you're doing,
oh my God. Right? Here's a bludgeon weapon. I could use this to bludgeon. So that's a bludgeon weapon.
You're not actually trying to find a way to interpret the word insurrection.
Look, a projectile.
You're saying it's so subjective that we shouldn't even try. Or that's what I'm hearing from you.
No, I'll give you a great definition, right? An armed attempt to make an overthrow of some type of law absent trying to overthrow the government which instituted it.
Absent trying to overthrow the government that instituted it? What's it?
Yeah, the law.
Okay, so an insurrection would not include the Civil War?
Well, that would be rebellion.
Sorry, the Civil War was...
We're trying to overthrow the government.
Unless you're saying...
So the Civil War was trying to overthrow the government, yeah? Hang on a second. Was the Civil War trying to overthrow the government, Pisco?
I think that the Civil War was, in some respects, trying to overthrow the government.
Yeah, so that's a rebellion.
But hang on a second. What if what you're saying is that we discount Abraham Lincoln's pronouncement of insurrection after Fort Sumter, and you're saying that it doesn't matter, right? The fact that contemporaneously during the Civil War, people called it insurrection. They called them insurrectionists. The people to whom this was meant to apply was to
before it became a war. Before it became a war.
if insurrection does not include civil war, we're at a problem here, folks. Can we find one insurrection?
So when they're seceding, hang on, when they're seceding, this would fit my definition fine. So if you secede, you can be an insurrectionist. You're still not trying to overthrow the government. You're trying to overthrow the law. However, once it turns into armed conflict, it would be rebellion.
So
this is why I believe that
was the first state to,
and this is why I believe that Webster's dictionary here gives you a much better overview of this by saying it's not rebellion. Because I think that the spirit of what they're trying to capture here is that rebellion is an armed, open conflict against the arbiters of the law or the people who made the law, whereas an insurrection is the overthrow of the law, absent trying to overthrow the government body who instituted it.
I don't think that first of all, squares with Rob's definition, just to be clear.
I think it does.
Exactly the opposite. Rob is saying that there need to be an overthrowing intent for insurrection. In fact, when he's saying it's not an insurrection,
that would be intent.
No, but that would be rebellious intent under your definition, not an insurrectionist intent.
No, it'd be an insurrectionist intent.
Oh, okay, so I thought you just made a carve out and said.
No, I'm talking about for Jan 6. We're talking about the Civil War. The original secession, right, would have been a secession. Now, the government could have seen that as being insurrection then, but they couldn't see it as being an insurrection after there was armed conflict. Then it's rebellion.
Okay, so South
but
Carolina,
both require arms.
South Carolina was the first state to secede, and they did quote unquote secede. First of all, the Union never sort of recognized the secession. Their position this entire time
they thought it was insurrection.
There was no,
and that's because the Carolinas had armed militias, which they activated on behalf of the state. That would be armed insurrection. Exactly.
When did the insurrection start? When the first attacks happened on Fort Sumter, or did it start when they mobilized their militias?
Probably when they mobilized the militia.
Okay, so but was there an intent there to overthrow the
law? Yes, to secede.
Okay, so, all right. So then, in your situation, it doesn't require any use of force, correct?
Well, no, that would be the implied use of force.
So mobilizing is a use of force?
Well, that's an implied use of force. You can see that as an attempt to commit insurrection, even if you haven't done insurrection yet.
Okay. If I can, real quick, if I could
just... I mean, no, Pisco, pick it apart. You got nothing, right? You got nothing.
No, I think that insurrections require more than just arming yourself. I think insurrections require specific. I would agree with you that a threat of.
What if my intent to arm myself was to be an insurrectionist?
I would think if there was a specific intent to make a threat or to actually use force, I would say yes. But I think that just arming oneself, just like there are a lot of people in the South who arm themselves in fear of defense, right, or in fear of their own property, or in fear of who knows.
Yeah, that's not insurrection.
If I could just real quick. Because I get if I just want to say this. The problem is that this is being used in a way that it's never done. And it seems clear that there are a ton of possible definitions for insurrection, right? And the problem is there needs to be some level of severity, some threshold that would be reached. We can't have a definition of insurrection that would include literally thousands of things that have happened in the past 10 years. Because if that's the case, and we've never executed this law in this way, to just do it now with Donald Trump seems egregious. And what I'm saying is, if you even further look, the term insurrection is interesting. The more interesting term when it comes to the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is giving aid and comfort to enemies of the United States. So I could make this argument.
Well, that's sedition.
Well, please, but it doesn't matter because the 13th Amendment says if you do that, you also can't serve office.
Foreign countries is not. It's not going to be foreign countries. So if you're going to say,
why would it? No, wait. I'm sorry. Say again.
So it doesn't include foreign countries. That would be treasonous.
No. See, now you see Pisco. So now you see Pisco. Now you see Pisco making the argument that's sort of the same argument that he's criticizing with Andrew. Treasonous could still be aiding it. Treason is a more specific term, but that would still be aid and comfort to a. If I commit treason, have I given aid and comfort to an enemy of the United States?
As you're understanding enemy of the United States, yes.
Okay. Now, okay. So then, given
the provision of law that the people intended,
just to be clear, by the language of the law, then that would mean that something like Joe Biden of giving $6 billion. Please let me finish, please. So that would mean Joe Biden giving $6 billion to Iran could be considered giving aid and comfort to enemies of the United States. Yes, it does. That's literally what the reading says. So your argument is when they say aid and comfort to enemies of the United States, they only mean domestic enemies.
To insurrectionists and rebellions. This was
no. The term is separated. The term is separated from insurrection.
The reference. I don't think.
So I just want to be clear, please, real quick. Your argument is this: Back when was the 14th Amendment passed? 1867, something like that. 1868. Okay. So in 1868, they passed this law, right? And it had to do with the Civil War. And so then the next year, say hypothetically, England decides to invade the United States again, right? And there's a bunch of politicians that serve in office, and they're giving intelligence so that England could win. They're Benedict Arnold. They're giving them money. They're doing all this shit. You're saying the intent of this after that war would be those people absolutely could serve. Absolutely, that we don't consider that giving aid and comfort to the enemy of the United States. So they could still serve in office.
So those individuals, first of all, to the extent that there's any isolated incidents where they're actually using, encouraging domestic insurgents, that would be a different thing. What I'm telling you is this law was specifically designated for insurrectionists who, especially specifically previous oath takers. It was obviously calibrated to deal with
the Civil War, right?
Circumstances.
That's exactly the point, Pisco. A law that was calibrated for the Civil War that you're now trying to use for a riot that got out of hand.
So it's designed for internal divisions and conflict. It's not designed to be facing to other countries.
You can't have your cake. You can't have your cake and eat it too. This is the last word I have on this, I promise. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, the actual language and to look at dictionary definitions of what aid and comfort to enemies of the United States was. We can't use those in 1860 because you know what those definitions are going to say. It would mean aiding foreign countries would be included as well. You say, but that wasn't the intent. That wasn't the intent. So we can't take the specific language of that law. But then when it comes to me saying, like, look, clearly the intent of this was they didn't want fucking people from the Civil War that served in office that were in the South that were trying to secede to then be politicians in the future. That's what it was about. Please let me finish. That's what it was about. And to say, well, that's clearly not remotely what's happening now, a riot that got out of control. That's clearly completely different. And you're like, no. We have to look at the word insurrection in the definition from 1868. That's the definition. You can't have it both ways.
So just I want to be clear because Andrew's getting into some of it too. And listen, in terms of Andrew's, there's a little bit of language philosophy going on with Andrew, which I think is really fascinating. And who decides what things mean? I've heard him say before. I think that's all fair game for you to attack definitions and all that stuff. That's all cool. What I'm trying to reference you is in systems of liberal democracy where there's judicial review and courts need to make decisions, right? When oftentimes they'll have to refer to constitutional provisions that don't very clearly explain themselves. So one example is Congress shall make no law respecting establishment religion or prohibiting or abridging the freedom of speech.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
The freedom of speech in that is specifically referencing a value and a notion that was known to the English common law, right? And that
which came from the Justinian law.
Sure, right. Which has
So the thing is, I don't disagree with any of this, Pisco, but the thing is, I don't think it reached the heart of it. I gave a concise definition to make a distinction, which actually makes sense. It makes more sense than either of your definitions. That an insurrection would be to overthrow a law without trying to overthrow the government who implemented the law. An example of this would actually be kind of keyed in with, let's say, for instance, that a tax was levied on a specific town. Okay. It was levied on a specific town, but only on that town within a state. And the state had passed that town gets that tax levied. The people in that town armed themselves, but they said, we're still members of this state. We're not going to attack any officials in this state. However, if you come to the town to collect the tax, we are going to resist that. You think that would be a distinction between a rebellion and an insurrection?
I think there's overlap here. I don't think
there's always going to be overlap.
I don't think they're hermetically sealed.
I'm not saying that they're in a vacuum. There can be overlap, but the same reason that the rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion that you referenced, 150 men were tried for treason, not for rebellion.
Yeah, right. So I'm not the criminal code, right? And what crimes you're tagged with. There's never necessarily going to be a one-to-one between what an event is called and what you're charged with, right? So, like, is there a crime, like, in terms of 9/11, let's say that there were no terrorism laws on the books, right, at the time, and nothing. Let's say that I'm sure there probably was, but they were significantly expanded.
Right. But for the purpose of the hypothetical, I get it.
Hypothetical, and there was they went into the Twin Towers and they were just charged with like mass murder or something. That we wouldn't be like, well, they were charged with murder. Murder is not terrorist because they were never charged with terrorism.
Mhm.
I understand that there could be differences of opinion and what the words and meaning
Yeah,
are.
but you do have specific definitions for what makes something terrorism, which is a political act of violence. Also, that's included in those codes for a reason. I'm saying that I think that my definition would capture the intent far better than yours, especially considering the references that you use for these different rebellions that you have to kind of arbitrarily decided were insurrections based on, I don't
I
know,
don't know if
some
it's arbitrary.
perceptions at the time or
So,
something.
so Andrew, I don't think it's listen. I'm not saying that your principle is not workable, right? It's a workable principle. It is a definition that you're providing, and someone could interpret that definition just like Rob's definition is a workable definition. It's one that we can
Thanks.
use. I'm not saying that it can't be used. The question is, what is the basis of it? And what you're saying is that me picking out examples of things that people at the time of the framing of the amendment would have considered those things, right? Just like, they would have considered this a chair, they would have considered this a woman, whatever you want to say in terms of insert your category there or your heuristic there, whatever you want to say. That what better way do we have to understand the scope of it without like looking just for the freedom of speech example? How do we understand what that means? We look to what the English common law would have thought of the exceptions to free speech: defamation, pornography, right, like obscenity, those kind of things. Those were traditional categorical exclusions to what the freedom of speech meant to those people at that time. There were things banning obscenity, and obscenity law can absolutely exist. I know that you don't like pornography, and it's one of the reasons we would think, like you might argue, that pornography is not protected under the First Amendment is because we looked back to this value and what the practice was at the time of the English common law. Did they have laws prohibiting this while still recognizing their right of Englishmen to have free speech? That's what I think that having that historical grounding is important. Not to say that modern context is not relevant as well.
Yeah,
It
but
is.
I'm granting the historic grounding, and I'm saying that even at the time, they were making clear distinctions between this. But I have to move on because I can't belabor the point with you. Appreciate you engaging with my question.
Yeah,
I do have to move on here to Rob. And Rob, I got to play devil's advocate just a little bit with
fair.
what you're saying. As this critic, you've come under fire multiple times under this criticism now. I've heard it from Pisco, and I heard it before with Destiny in your last debate. And the criticism is that you do seem to kind of belabor the point that you think that the FBI itself was responsible for kind of instigating this insurrection through actions that they took. But when both of them ask you for kind of the evidence that you can produce to show that this is true, I haven't actually heard maybe the most compelling case you can make. So I'm kind of curious as to what that evidence actually is.
So we have to see first what their motivations are and what their actions have been going up. So there is a clear pattern. For example, we could see the pattern that is most recent would be the Whitmer case, where they entrapped a bunch of people that were Trump supporters into this cockamamie scheme where half the people involved were agents of the feds or confidential human sources to engage in a kidnapping plan, etc. And we could see the FBI's actions for 7 years were detrimental to Trump constantly. You could see it from the IG report, the Durham report, and the treatment that Trump people got versus the treatment that others. Then we get to the incident leading up to January 6th. So the evidence that I have is the actual claims that we have that the FBI themselves have made and trying to come up with the best possible explanation is. So the evidence we have is that members of the FBI are now saying that they had a bunch of people that were infiltrated these organizations that knew that an insurrection was about to occur, but they never delivered that evidence to the people that were tasked with security.
Yeah, but
And
Rob, so just give you a little pushback here, and you kind of deserve it on this, I think. Federal government agencies are broadly known for being ineffective, stupid, not communicating with each other very well, and dropping the ball kind of over and over and over again. Nobody's actually worse at doing that than undercover agents who infiltrate different organizations. Literally, nobody's better at dropping the ball on intel sharing, gathering, nor the collecting portion. So even when many of these groups we've seen throughout even my lifetime have been infiltrated by undercover informants, gone on to commit the crime, even though the undercover informant sent the intelligence over that this was happening. So I do think you either have to have one of two criteria here for that. Either one, we're going to blame that on negligence, or two, that the FBI is promoting and pushing these activities, right?
Well, to blame it on negligence would ignore the pattern that we've seen over and over. So when you see a pattern that this same excuse is given every time, it's incompetence, it's negligence. And the pattern that we see for 7 years is when they're simultaneously investigating Hillary's team and Trump's team, the IG report says there was a bunch of questionable things that were done in both of those investigations. Almost every one of those targeting Hillary's team was beneficial to Hillary. Almost every one of them targeting Trump's team was detrimental to Trump's team. So we see this pattern of it over and over again. And when we see then when something like this comes up, and it's not just normal negligence, either they're lying then or they're lying now, because now they're saying, well, this was some of the most important. Oh my God, we have to use this evidence to go after people. I don't think that these agents that were infiltrated, if they seriously believed there was an attempt on the overthrowing of the government, at that point that we could say that these career agents were like, I'm just not going to pass this, or it's going to get lost in the shovel. We're not going to pass it. I think that the best explanation, given the history that we've seen, given the clear bias against Trump from leaders at the FBI, which you can see regardless if they acted on it or not, and given that, you know, these are career people and the stakes are so high, we're talking about a potential overthrow of the government, that the best argument is, the most likely scenario is that this wasn't just another example of gross incompetence, that this was information that was intentionally withheld because the FBI, again, just like with the Whitmer thing, was trying to set up a situation where they could blame Trump people, which is exactly what happened. And they've increased. Look at how it's been beneficial to the FBI. It's the largest task force in history. Now they're talking, we need brand new $100 million buildings. We need to increase the FBI. Just like,
yeah, but this is very circumstantial.
Well, what evidence would not be circumstantial in this case if?
So I can levy a good,
sure.
Or at least I think decent evidence on your behalf that this at least is possible. But I don't even think that Pisco's denying that. Like, for instance, Pisco, you wouldn't deny that there was federal provocateurs who assisted in Black Lives Matter all the time and assisted in some cases.
I've heard of those reports. I haven't investigated them, but I don't deny that it's possible.
Right. He's not denying that. And when I say possible, I don't mean Superman possible, meaning Superman can logically exist. I'm saying that there's at least some semblance of likelihood that federal agents
involved in criminal conspiracies before and have been culpable in fucking up with rights and literally starting riots and going after it. It has happened in our history for sure.
Right. So the thing is I'm just trying to be totally fair here, Rob. What makes this not circumstantial? What makes this kind of a smoking gun?
Well, let me be clear. I wouldn't claim that it's not circumstantial. I'm saying it's the most likely scenario. Circumstantial evidence is still evidence. And when the alternative, for example, here's the example I give, right? Let's say that there was a corrupt police department. Like I used to like this show, The Shield, right? So let's say there's a corrupt police department and they plant drugs on someone in the back of the car. And so then they're like, hey, we see that these drugs went from you to this person. We know that happened. How do you explain it? And they all testify, you know what happened? We had drugs that we were taking to the evidence room in our pocket, and it fell out of our pocket and landed on all four of us. It fell out of all four of our pockets, and it landed on the person we had arrested. Now, you would say that's circumstantial. There's no testimony from anyone saying, yes, we did illegally plant evidence. But it's so overwhelming that the alternative explanation would be so ridiculous that you say, well, wait a minute, the circumstantial evidence points to this being the most likely scenario. And it's not just that, it's also the reaction afterwards. So we can see that there's very little concern from people at the FBI, people in the January 6th committee, et cetera, that talk about how seminal this moment was, that all of a sudden they're interested in saying, we need to have a thorough examination, hold people accountable, find out exactly why this, that seems to be massively on the back burner. And to the point where now we see people like Ray Epps that's giving a slap on the wrist, a guy that we actually had, that the FBI well knows is the only person we had both the day before and the day of, that in 3 separate breaches was right at the breach. He's not even getting jail time. And so you could see a pattern afterwards and they've gone after Trump supporters as hard as possible. Now, I will concede at this point, we do not have smoking gun evidence, but there's more than enough evidence given the pattern of the FBI to show that this is the most likely scenario and to require serious investigations into what's going on in the FBI, which is why I support Vivek Ramaswamy. We should get rid of the FBI totally and criminally investigate those that have engaged in these sort of activities in the past 7 years.
Okay, guys, I got to move on to the super chats here. I'm not seeing callers in the backdrop, but my main mod isn't there. I don't know what's going on exactly. $5 comes in from Will Need Heart, who says keeping the lights on. I appreciate that. $10 from Joseph Newton. He says Pisco is such a weasel. Keep calling everything Rob says a conspiracy, fucker. A good number of so-called conspiracies are proven true many years later. We can all see right through you, Pisco.
Listen,
that's what
I don't deny when I say conspiracy, I'm not saying something improbable. I'm saying literally like a meeting of the minds for a criminal intent, like where there's a unlawful purpose and a meaning, a sinister meaning of the minds. I'm not using conspiracy as like, oh my God, flat Earth conspiracy. I'm saying a literal conspiracy. I don't even think Rob denies that that's essentially what he's alleging. Now he's saying, I think what you're saying is you wouldn't allege it or you wouldn't assert it. You just think it's the most likely outcome. I don't know where we are in the terminology.
Well,
there,
I mean,
Rob.
I will just say this. Come on. When people say conspiracy theorists, they're not saying, oh, literally a conspiracy is 2 or more people engaged in a criminal enterprise. That's all I meant by conspiracy. You know, that's not what you mean when you say that.
That is literally. So when I say that's what I meant, I mean it literally. You're alleging a conspiracy has a purpose, right? The purpose that you're alleging is that they wanted violence to occur, right? That they wanted that outcome that they eventually got, right? What you're saying is it was a successful conspiracy and a meeting of minds for a specific purpose. What other word best describes that?
Can I just ask you real quick? Do you think that outcome benefited the FBI and the Democrats?
I don't know. No.
You can't say that it did. It didn't help the Democrats and their agenda and the FBI.
Which agenda is that?
The Democrats' agenda to get rid of MAGA and to help them politically and to be able to censor people online that they disagree with and have a task force. Right, but it's certainly I mean, come on, Pisco. This is what I'm talking about, Bowman type shit. Clearly it's benefited
Trump's
them.
ahead in the polls, bro.
It's clearly it has benefited them.
What does that have to do with anything that he's had in the polls?
Because he's saying that it helped them destroy MAGA or eliminate.
Did it help the FBI like make a case for increased funding?
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it helped.
It's like saying that there's nothing that you did to this bad thing that you didn't have the result that you intended, therefore the bad thing didn't happen. That's just kind of absurd logic.
No. What I'm saying is just because something and it's kind of like who said it? Was it Rahm Emanuel who said never let a good crisis go to waste? Right? That I don't deny that. I'm sure in light of January 6th, a lot of people have appropriated January 6th images or that feeling to get money, to get fundraising, to win elections. Joe Biden, start of his campaign, is all about January 6th and insurrection and all that stuff, which I support him doing that and appropriating that way. But he's using it for his own ends. That doesn't prove a criminal conspiracy. It shows that people are aware of things and tactically using it. And guess what? Republicans do that too. Republicans use things that occur for their own ends as well, like Benghazi, the Hunter Biden stuff. You know, they fundraise off that as well. But you would never say, well, that shows that there was a criminal conspiracy to conjure up this.
Well, no, but to be clear, Pisco, to be fair, I'm not saying that on itself, but I'm just saying when you're looking at motive is one of the reasons that you would have a conspiracy, you have to agree that they've used this effectively, and it was predictable that
stuff, right? We have to. So that's the didn't it help Halliburton? Didn't it help Defense Department sales? Didn't it help the fact that there was 9/11 happened gave an excuse for American interventionism in Afghanistan?
That's true.
That was a big boon to the weapons manufacturers and to
That's true.
Okay, well, hang on. Before we go off on a tirade here, guys, I got to move on to the next super chat. I'm sorry. First person Q says, thick and full, always there. They come for me in times of despair, smooth and clean beneath my fingers. They echo far back to my foremothers, strong and direct like a warrior's arrow. They give me confidence, my lovely, lovely eyebrows.
Okay.
Oh,
my lovely.
I wondered where that was going.
Lovely
Shit.
eyebrows.
That's great.
$10 comes in from Wilhelm, but you didn't know the Crucible was full of poets and philosophers. $10 comes in from Wilhelm Bones. No message entered by user. Very, very much appreciated to Wilhelm. Always been a long time show supporter. Patrick Guard says, new music was fucking sick. I'm glad that you really enjoyed it. We actually had it for almost 2 years. We just haven't really used it. Face Palmer says, for $5, if Hunter Avalon's girlfriend was there, nobody would have been fine. Pisco, I like kind of making you progressive suffer just a little bit when you have to actually hear the criticisms. Vile Van Gogh, thank you so much, sends in his membership super chat. And says,
I like that name. It's like a very, I like the consonants. Vile.
Yeah,
alliteration.
Vile Van Gogh. It's very good. Yeah, he says you can't fire alarm your way out of bad faith. It's pretty funny.
Cool.
Logan Daly gifted 5 Crucible memberships. Thank you so much, Logan. Appreciate it very much. David says laws should always be narrow.
I agree that there should be limiting principles to law, and one of the challenges is like dealing with provisions like the Equal Protection Clause. Does that mean that we have to protect all classes? Does the Equal Protection Clause apply to gay people? Does it apply to just
No.
racial minorities? Does it apply to women? Right. So what you might do, right? Like an analysis like that's more purposive, like and is more open, right? Would be, well, what do we consider to be discriminated classes today? And we're going to apply the provision this way. But if you were more focused on history and tradition, all that stuff, maybe you would say this only applies to Black people, or this only applies to racial minorities, or this only applies to whatever, right? So there needs to be limiting principles to everything. And I don't agree with the just like come up with a rule that I think feels good today. I think that it should be grounded in something, and maybe it should be grounded in Christian theology. Maybe it should be grounded in, but like something should base it, and you should be clear about what that is. And I think you're not hiding the ball, Andrew. I think Rob is more hiding the ball. I think that Rob is manipulating his definition to achieve his ends. That's what I get the sense of.
Well, I disagree, because what I'm doing is trying to show that there needs to be a level of severity. And you know this because I've gone through it, because I initially put a video out, which you did correct me on the specific of this. Yeah. And I said the definition that was used by the Colorado court, we can see that many people in Antifa, Black Lives Matter, the Chaz Zone, people that attacked ICE facilities, many of which were supported by Democrats, right? That would mean that those are also fit that definition of coup or insurrection, and therefore those Democrats should be removed from the ballot. And you said, but wait a minute, they technically didn't use this definition. They just gave it as an example, and then said, well, wait a minute, clearly what Trump did, even though we're not defining insurrection, meets any definition.
No, I would grant a lot of those examples. Rob, I just want to say this real quick. There are two definitions that are relevant here. It's insurrection. Well, there's more, right? But at least for these ones, insurrection and engage. Just because there is an insurrection, I acknowledge that there's an insurrection in Chad and all these places and a lot of the BLM, doesn't mean that everyone who supports BLM generally is engaging. Just like I don't believe everyone who supports the Capitol rioters are engaging in insurrection. They're just not under the definition of engage. And
well, we could argue about engaged at points, but there are clearly Democrat. Would you admit that there are First off, will you admit that you never called out any of these other insurrections in real time when they were happening? You never called them insurrections.
What do you mean? Wait. I was against the
Did you call it an insurrection?
The riots?
Did you call? You were against it. You were speaking up. Well, no, wait. This is an important point. You were against it. That's great. No, please. Hang on. You were against it. That's great. And you were speaking about it. That's great. So surely you called it an insurrection.
It wasn't relevant because there was no politician.
Oh, that's weird. That word didn't come to your mind about it. And it's weird that you didn't say there were clearly public figures that were supporting.
Not engaging in insurrection.
Why would that be a requirement for you to think it was an insurrection?
It's not a requirement for there to be an insurrection. I agree that many of these instances were insurrections. The question is, to whom does Section 3 of the 14th Amendment apply? It applies to one, previous oath taker, so it has to be someone who has held office, and it has to apply to people who engage in insurrection. And
they certainly
clear. If Joe Biden was
promoted a bail fund,
no, very different, because very, very different. There were people in Congress afterwards who were promoting lenity for the Civil War people, and who, as you mentioned earlier, Rob, who wanted to, expunge their records, who wanted to stop them from going to jail. Wait, why are you shaking your head?
It's an absolute absurd
and there are people who are saying that advocating that Trump should pardon all the January 6th hostages. They've said that.
Let me ask you this.
Let me just finish thought.
Okay.
I don't think that they're engaging in insurrection by just offering mere vocal support. What you need to show engage is more than that. Like Attorney General Stanberg's opinion showed, it's not just acquiescence, it's not just support, it's directed active conduct.
Okay,
and that's
last word, real quick, Rob.
Okay, please. The idea that if promoting a bail fund for people that just violently attacked buildings and engaged in an insurrection isn't engaging in the insurrection. Let me just ask you point blank. Do you think had Trump pardoned a bunch of Proud Boys and January 6 people, that the Colorado court would have used that as evidence to say that he engaged in an insurrection?
Only with respect to the intent. Only with respect to. Hang on. That is not in. You're messing up the analysis here, Rob.
No, I'm not. That's exactly.
I would like to explain the analysis. So, the pardoning almost certainly would not be engaging. I can give you a situation where it would be, but then it would be like Trump. If Trump promises preemptively and says, "If you go attack, I will pardon you," then you could say the promise is potentially engagement. You're inducing, just like
I disagree. I think the
guys, we're
court would have
low on
clearly
time.
said-
We still have callers and super chats. I'm sorry, we have to keep moving. I told you it goes quicker than you think. Fresh Pelmini says for $7.99 Australian colloquial definitions matter. They're perhaps the most important in politics. The language of the commons is what determines and dictates the narrative.
Under that theory, free speech means that you can't ban obscenity. Free speech means that there's no defamation law, right?
Why would that be an entailment?
I think, sorry, it's not an entailment, but if you take it to its logical conclusion, which is only look to colloquial definitions when you're interpreting legal principles, then it really is unbounded. And then really we're not even checking on what these provisions meant to people who enacted them and what values that they're trying to represent. And I think that's critical. Otherwise, it really is it's pure subjective. And I think that's
yeah, but it's also rights are subjective.
I agree at base they are, but there's a scaffolding here that's been built for at least centuries for some of these.
Yeah, but it's just all self-referencing. Just all self-referencing.
That's what I think everything is at bottom. Maybe
yeah, so this is a question again. It's like if you get down to the grounding foundation here, isn't it really just a subjective opinion from you that this is an insurrection to begin with?
I think we do it because it works, because it doesn't lead.
Yeah, sure. Tradition is a series of experiments that worked. I agree. Yeah. Okay. And that's what this is. This is an appeal to tradition. Exactly. You're saying my appeal to traditions, I think this is the closest encapsulation of insurrection. I get it, but I think that that's wrong. And it's demonstratively wrong. Because when the traditions that you appeal to weren't insurrections.
Okay.
And they were never labeled as insurrections. And the people who labeled them as insurrections.
You're just wrong about the historical record. The Civil War was labeled as an insurrection. It was.
The Civil War was labeled as a
rebellion and insurrection.
No, it was labeled as a rebellion and treason. That's actually when they went to the negotiating table after Lee surrendered, right? They gave them and pardoned them and gave them immunity from treason and rebellion.
They invoked the Insurrection Act. Lincoln invoked the Insurrection Act in response to the Civil War.
In response to secession, yes.
In response to the attack on Fort Sumter.
That would be secession. They were seceding.
That was the first that was the start of the war.
And I'm not even sure. Is that true? Was the Insurrection Act enforced after?
They weren't trying to fight. They were trying to prevent conflict.
They were trying to prevent it. Exactly. So they were trying to prevent the secession. Right. I agree with that.
No, but it became inevitable when the South attacked the federal installation. And at that point,
still wasn't inevitable.
Well, what I mean to say is the invocation of armed forces. I guess you could just say America should have stayed divided and Confederates should have won. But if America really wanted to hold on to the Confederate states or the rebellious states, they needed to muster arms, and that's what they did. And
yeah, but he could also Pisco, you can invoke an act because it's the closest thing you have on hand for mobilization, even if that still doesn't mean that it's the thing.
I agree. At bottom, it's just part of the puzzle, right? The truth is, there's a ton of sources of meaning you can get. The public called it an insurrection. They invoked the Insurrection Act. They passed provisions of law dedicated
well,
specifically to
some of the public called it an insurrection. Some of the public did not call it an insurrection. It was a totally different thing altogether.
Yeah, well, the winners, in that sense, there's the power analysis.
That's right. The winners could call it whatever the fuck they want.
There's a power analysis here too, because I guess to the Southerners, they're being aggressed on, and their sovereignty is being infringed by the Union armies who are really, the war is happening.
No, I mean, people in the North, the Copperheads were all for it and this type of thing. So the people in the North weren't even calling it an insurrection. Many of them were saying it wasn't. So you're really appealing to a segment here. And you're also appealing to only the fact that this act was used in response to secession, essentially. But that was what was on hand to use.
Then what else would insurrection mean, right?
Well, I mean, I think that's much closer to rebellion than insurrection. I think you would agree.
Civil War, I think, was both.
I think it was much closer to rebellion than insurrection.
I think it's very clearly examples of both. And, you could say what's the best word for Civil War, I would say would be rebellion, 100%.
Yeah.
But I would also say second place goes to insurrection. And I just think rebellion gets to the heart of the
second place is just the first loser, Pisco.
Sure.
Okay. Anyway, The Raging Patriot 1776 says for $5, I was told there'd be punch and pie in a Cartman voice. Enhancer, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead with your question.
Hello, yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, so my question is to Rob. Rob, to believe your argument, I have to believe that multiple components of the United States government conspire to defraud and oppress its own citizens. To believe Pisco, I have to believe Trump is selfish and incompetent. I'm not saying that unbelievable things can happen. Instead, I would like to know your strongest piece of evidence to get me to believe your position.
First off, you could simultaneously believe both. So you could make the argument that you hold Trump culpable, but still the FBI was engaged in leading these dominoes to be set up to fail. Second, your same argument would have been an argument used against the illegal spying on Trump's team, that 6 top people at the FBI, 3 teams of 6 top people. People like you would have said, I would have to believe that 18 at least.
Like me?
Right. People that are making arguments like you're making.
Okay.
It seems impossible that up to 18 high-level people at the FBI could push for these sorts of things when that's exactly what happened. Again, Chuck Schumer actually called out that these are the sorts of things that the FBI would apply. And it doesn't need to be that many people. Right? It's not like Destiny tried to say the other day that it would require thousands of people to be in on this. Oh, you could have, for example, have the on-the-ground agents that are accurately reporting the data that they're getting up to their supervisors, and then those supervisors that are actually on the phone with security, like Capitol Sun, the chief son, not handing that evidence over. It would only require a handful of them. And we continually hear these claims of, oh, I refuse to believe that this many people, that it would, these people would be involved in this. It's absurd. We see example after example happening in real time where there's an awful lot of people that are allowing things to occur in this country that they know they shouldn't. For example, let me ask you this. If I was to believe that Epstein didn't kill himself, then I would have to believe that there were like literally hundreds of people involved in that conspiracy, correct?
Yes, I mean, I suppose, yeah, you would if you believe he did not kill himself. Yes.
Well, he didn't.
Well, I understand that you believe that, but I also believe that Epstein did kill himself.
How many people would have to be involved in the conspiracy to think that it is a true statement that Jabal Bowman and didn't charge Jabal Bowman because they saw that?
Listen, that's Pisco. That's Pisco. I believe Jamal Bowman's an idiot. All right.
No, I'm asking you seriously. He wasn't criminally charged.
Okay, listen.
Listen, he wasn't criminally charged with obstructing official proceeding, but you could see the evidence right in front of your eye. How many people had to be involved in that decision to not charge and be okay with it?
I think the situation is definitely different there. I think that because when you're I mean, I hate to give it to you, I hate to say it, but you have not established that Jamal Bowman was attempting to disrupt.
Hang on. I'm sorry, caller. I don't mean to cut you off. I have to move on to the other callers. Go ahead. I just want to give you very quickly, let you wrap your point up.
Oh, okay. My point or Rob's point?
Yeah, your point. You can wrap up, bro.
My point is that the United States government is pretty incompetent, and the United States Army does not communicate well. I say that as a veteran of 4 years, from 2018 to 2022. It seems very, very likely to me that there was a miscommunication. People messed up. It would destroy my soul as an American to know that the FBI, this institution that's brought down terrorists and drug dealers and all that stuff. Yeah,
just real quick. I promise this is all. You would agree that one of the guys that was near the top of the army was General Pyatt, correct?
I'm not sure, but General sounds pretty high up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lieutenant General.
All right. I'm sorry. I have to wrap the call, man.
Please, it's really, really important, right? If he saw the insurrection occurring in real time and said that he didn't want the National Guard deployed because of optics, do you think there's a possibility that a military man like that thinks that there's going to be a tax on the government, it's going to be overthrown, but they don't want it stopped because of optics? How do you explain that?
I absolutely can explain that because field grade officers are only care about the careers and no one else.
All right. Thank you, caller. I appreciate it.
All right,
have a great day. Right. By the way,
good career move there, huh?
Just real quick, I wanted to ask you something. It occurred to me as we were going through this. When the United States Army was attacking Native Americans out on the plains, do you believe that the Native Americans were engaged in insurrection?
Legally, and this is going to be hurtful for people to hear, because I'm rooting my definition of insurrection for purposes of the application here. I would say no. If you look at American jurisprudence, they did not consider Native Americans to be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, such that they would be and
So they weren't
citizen-
engaging. They weren't engaging in insurrection.
It was a war of conquest. This was like
because
Terranolius.
the Insurrection Act was mostly invoked against Native Americans. Pisco.
When?
Well, it was invoked in the 18th, or I'm sorry, in the 19th century, which is the 1800s. It was invoked during
I could be wrong about the history.
during
I could be wrong.
14 different Native American conflicts. It was invoked, the Insurrection Act. Pisco.
I could be totally wrong about.
Well, I don't understand, Pisco. I thought you had a good historical reference to how this act should be used based on the definition in the historic context, Pisco.
All you're saying, right? All you're saying is you're broadening it, right? You're broadening it to include Native
I'm not
Americans.
broadening shit. I'm saying that it was literally used multiple times against Native Americans and invoked against Native Americans as this act was invoked against Native Americans to put down their insurrection, to think you don't consider it to be an insurrection.
If that's true, that's compelling evidence that disproves what I just said, right?
That's right.
It
does.
True, if it's true that the Insurrection Act and terms like insurrection were applied to Native Americans, then the historical examples you just cited disprove what I was just talking about with Terranolius and conquering.
The Insurrection Act has been invoked many times throughout historic American history. In the 19th century, that would be the 1800s, Pisco, it was invoked during no less than 13 conflicts with the Native Americans. In fact, they say that it could have been invoked even more than that. We don't know.
So Andrew, that's a great example of using history and what people consider to be insurrections at the time guide one's analysis. Have it rooted in something objective.
It sounds like their analysis is different than what your historical analysis is, though, Pisco.
I am not an expert on Native relations and whether or not the notions of insurrections applied to non-citizens in the Native American context, which is a very special relationship in every sense, in the property sense, in citizenship. Just so you know, people, Native Americans born on reservations are not citizens except by a statute by Congress. The 14th Amendment does not give.
Yeah, I'm aware they're their own nations.
Right. So
why was the United States running around? It's declaring that they were involved in insurrection.
Andrew, this is my honest, pure intuition that I wouldn't think it would apply. But what you just showed is the benefit of using an approach that's grounded at least somewhat in purpose and history, because it shows that, okay, now I can be disproven. Otherwise, I can't be disproven. I'd be like, oh, well, I decided that it doesn't apply to natives, and that's whatever, right?
Yeah, it's whatever. I mean, I think it kind of proves your entire analysis wrong. Just instantly proves it wrong. But
you just use the analysis, right? You just use the analysis.
No, I use the analysis to show that your because it's an internal. This is an internal critique. So the internal critique is such. It's as follows. Pisco says, under my historic analysis, because people made references at these various points in history, I have to assume that they knew what the fuck they were talking about. Because after all, these are the writers of the law. Okay, I'll use the same exact analysis that you're using by your same exact metric. And then when I ask you about Native Americans, you say absolutely not. And then, of course, we find out the Insurrection Act's been used against them more than any other.
Andrew, that's just me whiffing on history. If you were to do a Bible analysis, right? And I underwent this biblical analysis and whatever, I don't know anything about biblical analysis, but the way I did it, I was misquoting a passage or citing a passage without including its relevant context or what's going on.
Then you would be wrong.
And you would bring it up. You'd be like,
so I'd bring that up and I would prove that you were wrong in your analysis.
In applying, right? But what we're questioning here are the standards themselves. What do we use to find out whether something is insurrection?
Yeah, but you say that history is what that standard we should use.
History is one of the strongest guides to help us understand.
Right. So I just used that to blow out your analysis. So what do you have to say here?
What you just did shows one of the strengths of the analysis.
No, it shows that while I can use your same analysis, the pathway, so this would be the pathway to find the result, I can use the same pathway you do to come to a completely different result and would be just as right.
No, I was wrong about the history then. If what you're saying is true and that people considered Native American interactions and conflict to be insurrections, and
Mhm.
I didn't know that history. What you've just done is using my methodology
Mhm.
show
Proving that you're fucking wrong. I know,
it's
Pisco.
incorrect, right? But there's
Yes.
nothing. That is not an indictment of the methodology. That's an indictment of
Yeah,
one's
but the method,
application of it.
I'm saying that by utilizing your methodology, I can still prove the analysis is different, even from a historical standard. So why should we go with your standard for what insurrection means, Pisco?
I am not a historian. If there was a
Then why are you trying to
if there was a
that you use this based on a
No,
historic
hang
analysis?
on a second. Because I am aware of, at least in the context of citizens, the key examples cited by in the 19th century for
Mhm.
classic insurrections. And so and those are ones that are really not up for debate in terms of the history and what they were referenced for. Like the Civil War just was referred to as an insurrection. What you're saying is I don't give a shit about all that. I'm not gonna like why to look to English common law for anything. Why look to the history of how these words were applied.
No, speaking of English common law, we could look to that too.
That sounds thoroughly modern, Andrew. I didn't expect it from you. That sounds like that sounds almost what's the word?
Like an internal critique.
A postmodern almost.
It
I
doesn't
don't know.
sound postmodern. It sounds like a philosophical internal critique, and by
What's
utilizing
your
the internal
analysis?
critique
Your
of the
analysis is
pathway.
whatever. What is your methodology? That's what I'm critiquing. It's like what are you offering?
Wait, you want to know what my methodology for determining what an insurrection is?
Your intuitions, right?
Well, no, not just my intuition. I would also look at a historic analysis. I don't think that that's off base. I'm just saying that based on the historic analysis, if we're both using the same thing, I'm coming to a radically different conclusion than you are.
Oh, wait. Is your historical analysis one that excludes the Civil War from being an insurrection?
Well, yeah.
Okay, then I just think that that's bizarre. But let's just do an easier case.
Yeah, but you don't include Indians, right? You don't include the Indians.
I don't know the relevant histories of what people refer to the Native Americans as. I was just riffing off my knowledge of the complexities and dark history related to Native American and Indian. Actually, you should use an Indian because they prefer it. Indian.
They prefer Indian?
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Actually, Indian. American.
Really?
Indian. Yeah.
True.
And why are all the fuckers on TikTok always freaking out when I say how you Indians doing? They get all kinds of mad.
This is just what I'm hearing. What I heard was, well, first of all, Indian is referring to a specific segment of indigenous people who existed in the North American region and that had a particular experience that's very different to all of Native America. Like the Southern American Native indigenous people were very different, and so using Native American can be an over-inclusive title.
Gotcha. Go ahead, man. It's your call. Casper.
Oh, that's surprising. One moment. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I have a lightning round questions for Rob Noerr. Rob, how are you doing?
Doing good. I got the first one right.
Okay, excellent. So I have a question for you. Was the American Revolution justified?
Sure.
Was it legal?
Not to the UK or not to England. No.
Okay, excellent. Do you support slavery?
No.
Okay, Pisco. Was the what do you think about his answers? Do you agree with them?
Yes.
So all three. Okay. Can you tell me how was it justified?
Well, how was what justified?
The American Revolution.
It had to do with political representation and taxes and other kind of complaints as related to the colonists and the individuals in the various colonies.
Would you consider it to have been like a slavery when the British conscripted Americans to fight, like to force them to fight on their behalf?
Not chattel slavery to the extent of
a form of it.
A less, like you're saying, mandatory conscription, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that. I think the term slavery usually implies
forced to do shit that you don't want to do against your will.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. That's fine. I understand. There's nuance. There's nuance. There's nuance. Let's go forward. So can you tell me how did the members of the Whiskey Rebellion justify their rebellion?
Yeah. So America had imposed taxes on not just whiskey, actually, but on all liquor, and they thought that those were unjust.
Do you agree with them that it was justified
for America to levy tariffs and excise taxes? I agree
the Whiskey Rebellion was justified, just like the American Revolution, right?
I don't agree. No.
Oh,
No.
what's the distinction?
Yeah, I would like to know that too.
Yeah, because I think more or less that the American experiment was worth trying. That the
That's post hoc justification.
You like the outcomes?
No. Hey, hang on a second. That I think that the sort of complaints, they still had representation in the Congress. It wasn't the same condition as what existed.
Could you, as an American, get representation in the British Parliament?
As an American, not to the same extent as a British.
Yes, you could.
The answer is yeah. The legal answer is yes.
Wait, the colonies were under complete British control.
But you could like influence politics in the Parliament quite easily.
It wasn't the same kind of representation that you received.
Okay, that's fine. There's a distinction. I'll take that. Okay. Tell me, how did Washington raise an army to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion?
He gathered militias from.
No, that's wrong.
What do you mean that's wrong?
He used conscription.
He used conscription. He conscripted 20,000 or more men.
20,000 or more men.
Yeah.
I don't recall those numbers, but when I say gather militia, I'm not referencing a specific kind of whether
he pressed them into service, so that he could go and quell a rebellion.
The American president has that authority right now too.
Right, but would you say that what Washington did was a counter revolution to the American Revolution?
I don't know.
It seems to me that if you rebel against something, and then the same person who's the leader of the rebellion then becomes a tyrant and does the same thing that your previous tyrant did, we call that a counter-revolution. I don't know about your socialist circles, but in my socialist circles, that's called a counter-revolution, like a classical one.
I think one had to deal with political participation and representation, and one had to do with being angry, a minority being angry at the imposition of taxation.
Pisco, can you tell me, how can a president conscript people?
What do you mean, legally or?
Yeah, right now. You said right now the president can do the same thing.
So he can mobilize and activate for federal service members of the militias who are under state control.
That would be National Guard. That's not conscription.
Excuse me. And he can also.
No, there's no excuse me. That's not conscription.
Wait, hang on a second. He can also. There's the selective service, as you're aware. Every man in the United States of a certain age has to.
Oh, who declares war?
Congress does.
Oh, so how does the president do conscription again? I'm confused.
Hang on a second. The American government has the authority, whether it's the president or whether it's delegated.
No, the president doesn't have the authority to do conscription.
Okay, listen. I am not prepared for a conversation about the conscription laws of the United States. I don't know them. I know that someone somewhere in the United States government.
Then why did you just say that they could? You just said that the president could conscript people right now.
To institute a draft. My understanding was that the president could institute a draft. I thought that law was passed, the Selective Service Act. I could be wrong about that.
Do you remember?
I don't know. It was passed by Congress, the Selective Service. That's what I think.
No. It was. Do you remember who passed that law?
What do you mean who? The Congress of a particular year? I'm not sure.
No. Yeah, the particular year and the president.
I'm not sure. No.
It was Woodrow Wilson, 1917. Okay. You should know that date.
There were other drafts too in the history of the United States.
Perhaps, but okay, that's fine. Okay.
All right, I appreciate the call-in, Kaz.
What's the point of this entire thing?
It was more interesting than the debate for me, so I had to ask it. Because people assume the Whiskey Rebellion is something evil, and they often, you present it as an evil to equate it to the evil January 6th insurrection.
There was no normative implication. It's just calling it what people back then referred to it. Would you refer, Casimir? Would you refer it as an insurrection?
I don't really care. I believe that I would say
you don't care.
I'm
asking you a question, though. Wait. You asked me a bunch of questions, so now I'm asking questions. Was the American Revolution an insurrection?
I don't care.
Oh, so you're not. So I had to answer all your questions, and you don't want to answer mine.
Yeah, I think that it is irrelevant as long as it was justified. Okay. I don't care about the names. I care whether it was justified or not justified.
Right.
That's
so
cool.
He's saying he's asking about so he's pinning it on a moral question. He's saying,
if I could step in real quick and say something. I'm not judging Pisco for this, just to be clear, Pisco, but I know you're an orbiter of destiny, And Destiny, when I talked to him about the George Floyd riots, this was before January 6th occurred, he admitted to me, he said the thing that he didn't like about the Floyd riots was that it was targeting domestic people.
He changed his position on that.
But he said this, and he said targeting governmental buildings, if you think that they've wronged you, is justified. In fact, he said that sort of targeting is the other side of the coin to voting. So what the implication seems to be there, the implication seems to be, if it is a cause that the winner agrees with, then it's not really a bad thing.
By the way, selective service activation does require Congress.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I just want to let you know
it
that.
Requires Congress to pass a law, or it requires their involvement?
No, they just have to authorize it.
Can I ask Casimir really quick? Did Congress do the conscription under the Whiskey Rebellion, or was it Washington himself?
I don't remember. From the article I read, it was Washington, but I don't really.
Well, they used to have much better.
Care whether things are insurrections or not. That's cool. In this country, we have a constitutional provision called Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, where we have to find out whether something is an insurrection or not, and you don't care about that question.
No, I'll explain why I don't care about it. Because I believe that the Constitution was usurpation. It was counter-revolutionary. And the more you study history, the more you study, it's not just like Washington raised an army, flowery language, and went and destroyed this dangerous Whiskey Rebellion. What he did was he raised a slave army through conscription and marched those slaves against peaceful farmers who just wanted to ship their hard-earned
I'm not having that conversation.
And,
I'm not,
and other things.
That's why he said he didn't care.
Right. The reason I don't care because the Constitution did not exist back then. In that
you
year
don't care about the Constitution. You don't care about the law. That's fine. That's cool. We are talking past each other because at no point in my conversation, I was trying to find out what people consider to be an insurrection. You don't want to answer that question.
Yeah, because that's a misdirection in the entire debate. I think the entire debate is a misdirection.
So just to be clear, the conversation about this panel was January 6th, and one of the key questions, one of the questions was what is an insurrection, I don't know if you missed it.
It's very key, but it's irrelevant to normal people down on the ground like me.
Whether something is
important to sleazy lawyers,
revolutionary or revolutionary, that's an important distinction that matters.
Yes, it's important for people on the ground like me.
Your little
and not to sleazy parasite lawyers that are at the top sucking our blood.
Your little words that you care about, that is revolutionary.
Yeah, it's justified and unjustified. Those are little words.
So what's a revolution?
All right, hang on. We can't stay on this piece because we're already over time. Kaz, I appreciate you calling in very much. We have one last caller we'll get to, then we'll finish the super chats, and we'll let you guys get out of here for the night. Javen MC11, can you hear me?
Yes. Am I sounding okay?
Yeah, you sound fine. Go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, I'm pretty sure you guys didn't talk about it yet, but what you both make of the released video footage of the Capitol during January 6th. Because from what I have seen, it looks like a lot of people walking around, police officers escorting people around, opening doors, and it seems pretty passive. And I don't understand how someone in their right mind can call them walking around peacefully without with the majority of them unarmed, anything close to an insurrection.
If I could piggyback up, to get your opinion, Pisco, at what point did you think that it became an insurrection? Clearly, the people just listening to the ellipse of Trump, you're not calling that anything.
Thank you, by the way, caller.
No. Yeah, no.
So what time of the day, what actions do you think started to where you said, okay, this is an insurrection?
Yeah, so I think force or threat of force starts something into insurrection, correct? And so at the point at which, but that said, I think that there is a big carve out that we should read Section 3 to be consistent with the First Amendment, which protects political speech, even speech that some people might find objectionable. And so I think when it turned into individuals imposing themselves past restricted areas and with the design specifically, when that the union of action, violent action, that is attacking police officers. I can't point to a specific point in time.
On that, right, but that's fair, of course. Right, when you say attacking police officers, I think because I watched a lot of this footage as well, and I think what the caller's referencing is like, when you say attacking police officers, up until like the actual fight in the tunnel, most of the attack of police officers just seem to be people like shoving signs. That's no big deal. Like pushing officers and shoving, that's not a big deal, right? Shoving signs at them, pushing them.
I think
that's not insurrection behavior, right?
So I think that there's a materiality for sure for force. I would agree with you on that basic concept that, pushing and shoving by itself, do I think that's sufficient force or threat of force to rise to a level of insurrection? Maybe not. But
do you think it's a felony?
Sorry, I think just mere presence, right? Just like you would think a bunch of people, let's say 1,000 people going to occupy just with their physical presence without specific arms, just using their fists to go and like oust a mayor or something and to kick him out or something to impose someone else, I would consider that an insurrection.
Last of this, real quick, Rob. Last of it.
Okay. Would you consider it a felony though? Because a lot of people have been charged. Real quick, a lot of people have been charged with violence that was literally just like pushing and shoving cups. Do you think that rises to the level of a felony?
Assaulting a police officer? Yeah, I think.
Can you explain why Ray Epps wasn't charged? I could show you video right now of him shoving a sign in the face of police officers violently.
I'm not sure about the circumstances of what you're talking about.
Well, if I show you video that Ray Epps was physically slamming a sign into a police officer, would you say that rises to the level of a felony?
I'm not sure. I've not read up on the law on a felonious assault.
Okay, and
usually felonious assault requires like a risk of serious injury, right? A battery, right? A felonious battery requires some. Are you denying what I'm saying?
No. But you've said it quite clearly. You correct me. I'm steel manning your position. You said quite clearly that every case that you've heard of January 6th of people being charged deserved it.
I've said that everyone that I've heard of the people that charge, I haven't seen overcharging. I think that the charges have by and large been appropriate, and I haven't seen an evidence of overcharging for individuals.
Well, I think the fact that we are told that it's felonious to attack police and stuff in that nature, and then we can see Ray Epps clearly does it, and the fact he wasn't charged.
Attacking a police officer could, if it's risk of serious injury, typically, right? If someone attacks you, if there's a risk of serious bodily injury, and that can occur with a punch.
We're way over time. I got to keep moving here. The Raging Patriot 1776 says, I read that. Sorry. Petrogard says, Pisco, if FBI agents were assaulting your wife, sister, mom, would you step in and physically defend them?
Yeah.
Okay. My tech says, go Rob. Harikiri and Seppuku, the eyed sophist. Okay.
English.
Yeah.
On the previous one, how best to defend your family. Sometimes it's not what you think, right? Sometimes the best way to defend your family, and I think Rob would probably agree with me on this. A lot of times when people try to fight back against police, and you see this in a lot of situations, it doesn't lead to good results if you're clearly overpowered.
Well, it's absolutely true. And let me speak specifically to January 6th, because what he's saying is there's footage after footage that's so peaceful people that the police are firing munitions is that it's complicated though. Like if I see that across the way and I say, hey, they just hit an innocent person, I don't get to then run up and jack a cop in the face. Like that's still going to be a charge. Yeah. Like, but it's not an insurrection.
Yeah. Todd Sullivan sent in a $10 super sticker. Appreciate it. Pisco has an out. He's a scumbag lawyer that doesn't have to stick to the facts. Okay. Appreciate the $5.
Can't argue with that.
Bruce Wayne the sober says for $5, Piss Company cries at night because Cher won't reply to his emails.
Cher, the singer?
I don't know. The Commonwealth member for 6 months says 2 dudes going ham debating, Crucible vibing in chat, and everything seems right with the world. I agree. Marcus Antonio gifted 5 Crucible memberships. Really appreciate that. Patrick Nyman sending $5 says for eyebrows, go to the website called Expose Sunrise. There's evidence of left-wing activists with federal agents planning. Okay. Well,
if it existed, Rob would bring it up.
Critical says for $5.
Delayed so much you can't get to the actual facts.
Yeah, Critical for $5 says Pisco should have pulled the fire alarm to get out of this debate. Dan 1994 for $5 says Pisco, if an insurrection is an uprising against the execution of law, how can the chief executive engage in an uprising against himself?
Because it doesn't reference the chief executive or insurrection against the king or insurrection against the president. It's insurrection against the Constitution. Engage in insurrection against the same, which is the Constitution. And so if it was intended, I think, to be an insurrection against the president as himself or in the role of the office of president, it would so state. But clearly there are some ideals, some notion.
Well,
of
it doesn't state fucking anything.
Wait. And I don't buy that explanation because it clearly doesn't state when it says or aid or comfort to enemies of the United States. It doesn't say only domestic enemies of the United States. And you say, well, we have to clearly look what their intent was. Their intent was never that Abraham Lincoln himself says, I think that this election was stolen and I'm pissed about it and I'm going to question whether or not it was stolen. And that's an insurrection. It was clear that that was never their intent.
Well, no. I mean, if you look back at what they were saying, everyone understood Jefferson Davis to be excluded from running for president.
Wasn't the president of the United States, right?
Right. So it's clearly the office of the presidency is an office under the United States. There's two components to it. There's officer of the United States and office under the United States. One is a disqualifying office, and the other one is a barred from office. Why are you shaking your head?
Because what you're doing is you're making two contradictory arguments. On one hand, when it comes to the phrase aid and abet or aid and comfort to enemies in the United States, you say, but don't look at the actual words. You have to look at the intent of what they were talking about. But then when we look at the fact that, like, clearly the intent, this had to do with the Civil War. They weren't intending a president who thought that the election was unfair against him to then say that that was an insurrection. That's clearly not what
make it quick as a response, Pisco.
Yeah, the words are important in both. The intent is important in both, and they use general words to encompass officers of the United States. President is an officer of the United States. Presidency is an office under the United States. It includes the president.
Hate to get back to Pisco here, but laws are supposed to be reflective of the language used when written. That's how we have an argument regarding the definition of well-regulated when it comes to the Second Amendment.
True.
Okay. Logan Daly gifts 10 Crucible memberships. Appreciate that very much. I do want to let you know, Pisco, that just in the spirit of being completely honest, he said that if I was able to work in Pisco at any point, he was going to gift 10 memberships. And a super chatter sent in a super chat that didn't actually have that word, but I added the word on purpose so that I could get those 10 gifted memberships.
No, you're
Pisco.
good. You're good.
I did that.
I don't even recognize that people do either one, but I see people laughing when they do.
Bruce Wayne says Benghazi mean when. Okay, well, I can't get into that. Go away says for $5. Andrew, your mods don't have the call link. We're waiting here. Sorry, I'm sorry. There was a failure somehow in the background. I don't know by what. It's possible one of my mods had an emergency. Compton sends in $5. Says here I sit. Cheeks of flexing. Just gave birth to an insurrection. Oh shit. Another new count for $10 says. Pisco, should every Seattle city official who provided water, portable toilets, etc. to Chaz be barred from office, giving aid and comfort, quoting you to an insurrection?
No, I think that for the intent requirement, why are you laughing?
It's a joke. Oh. You have TDS. You hold Trump to a standard you don't hold anyone else to. No, that's why we're laughing. What did Trump do that engaged? What did the Colorado? Let me give you an example. Incitement. He said fight like hell, right?
Incitement.
He said, it gives a bunch of examples. Trump, they say when he said be peaceful, they brought in a professor that said actually him saying peaceful is a dog whistle to not be peaceful. Then it gives it. Here's other examples. You tell me if I'm wrong. It said he liked the tweet that said the cavalry's coming. That's evidence of incitement, right?
That's evidence of intent.
Okay.
You're confusing the legal test.
He said fight like hell, right? And that means the court's saying, you tell me if I'm wrong. That's literally a message to his followers to fight, throw fists, correct?
Yeah, but that wasn't the only.
Okay, another example that the court gives is him talking about Mitch McConnell. And it says, this is basically what it says. It says Democrats would fight like hell if this was being done to them, but not Mitch. He has no fight. Is that him literally telling Mitch McConnell to put some fucking brass knucks on and go to town?
Again, I mean, you keep, and the fact that you don't want me to correct you, I think is.
Go ahead, correct.
You don't want to understand.
Go ahead, correct.
There's a set of statements that are inciting statements. Incitement requires imminence. Okay, incitement so me just saying something like, I hope someone burns down the Capitol one day, right, in the comfort of my home, it's not going to meet our test for incitement.
Agreed. That has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. Imminence is important. Got it. Moving on.
So when they're citing things that aren't in the time and place of what's going on, like, for example, when they're citing the fact that he likes a tweet, that they're citing, like, after the fact of his inciting words, he's doing certain things or he's being negligent or derelict in his duty, that speaks to his intent. But those aren't the specific incitement words that they're quoting.
No. It's speaking.
You gotta wrap it real quick, Rob. I'm sorry.
30 seconds. I know.
All
We're
right.
going. You see how Weasley this is, but the intent would still be that the intent is when he says fight like hell, that means use physical violence at some point. And you can see how he weaseled out of that. So what they're saying is, when he gave it,
Brandon,
I do understand it. So when he's giving the speech and he's saying we need to fight like hell and things like that, they say, see, that proves that he means physical fight. Just like in the past when he said this about Mitch McConnell. That speaks to his intent. And then real quick, and then when he says be peaceful, they say, no, be peaceful's really dog whistle to don't be peaceful. Yeah, and then when he puts out at 138.
Hang on, Rob, let him respond. Let him respond.
Go ahead, you don't understand the test for incitement, right? There's the words themselves are looked from an objective perspective and to see if they're, quote, inciting words. And that's done in the totality of circumstances test, right? If someone had like a secret code where you could see that peaceful meant whatever, right? And I don't think you would deny that this is a test on the listener. In addition, there's an examination of the speaker's subjective intent. That is to say, did Trump intend the outcome here? Did he actually want this to occur? And so you are conflating instances in which the court is citing previous conduct, statements made showing that he did not agree with the election, which were, yes, like lawful things for him to think and to say, but it goes to specific intent, subjective intent.
How did they roll on his subjective intent? What was their
we can't get into any more of this, guys.
Required him to.
We can't. I'm sorry. I know that you want to. I'm sorry, but
be peaceful means be violent. It's a joke.
Pisco is a history expert. Clearly,
I'm not.
Okay. Logan gifted 5 more Crucible memberships for a grand total, I think, tonight of 25 gifted memberships. Awful kind of him. Crowns in chat for Logan. Awesome. Thank you so much. Dan asked this last question. Now, Rob, I'm sorry. I'm not going to let you. I can't let you get in on this. I just got to direct it to Pisco. Let him answer it. Pisco, please be precise. Pisco, if you care about the text, Section 3 prevents holding office. Compare Article 2, which concerns eligibility. CO has no basis to remove Trump.
That's not true. If you look to opinion actually written by Neil Gorsuch, the majority Supreme Court opinion cites, which states that states have an interest in preventing ineligible candidates from being on ballots. And so it's just not the case. It would imagine someone would say like states have no role in preventing ballot access to people who are like not citizens or people who are like 22. It just doesn't work. Even Neil Gorsuch has recognized that states absolutely have an interest in preventing disqualified people from being on ballots and not just waiting for their like eligibility determination in the, I guess, electoral college sense.
Now, gentlemen, I'm sorry. I know both of you are probably very upset that we can't continue the debate. I'd love to because it was a lot of fun. It would have seemed like it went a lot longer, but we had kind of that 30-minute segment intro. And it really does make it feel like it cuts the time off. So I'm sorry about that. We try to keep these things right at 3 hours.
Can I just thank you real quick? I think
hang on. I promise we'll get to everybody. Yeah. But anyway, I usually get everybody out right at the 3-hour mark, right? Thank you, both of you, for staying past the 15. I wish we could have engaged even more. It's a hell of a debate, more fun than a human being should be allowed to have. Before I let you both go, Pisco. Yeah. Do you have anything left that you wanted to say? And of course, shout out your social media.
For sure. I just wanted to thank Rob. I think it was a fun spirited debate. And I think that having Andrew along, I think he did a fair job. And it was nice to speak to Rob. I miss talking to Rob. I like Rob. And I like talking to people who disagree with me.
I'm married. Just so you know.
Yeah, no, trust me. You're a good guy, Rob. But yeah, Andrew, I thought it was super professional, and I'm sure I disagree with you on a lot, but I find that the structure of it was just like fun and organized and professional, and I really appreciate that. And yeah, if you want to follow me, Piscolity on Twitter, and yeah, very much appreciated being on here. Yeah. And thanks.
No problem. It's the only place a leftist can get a fair debate. Is the only place a right winger can get a fair one too. Rob Noerr, go ahead.
Yeah, I had fun with the debate. I particularly enjoyed the Bowman setting the stage for. I know I wish we had more time, but I did appreciate it. And one question I'd asked the audience, and it was something that I pointed out. Notice how the mind reading of Jamal Bowman and his intent. Notice how it's completely opposite. He knows when Bowman literally said, "I didn't intend the alarm to go off." He knows what he really meant was he didn't intend it to be as big as it was. But when Trump says go peaceful, we know his intent. What we really meant was to go ahead and engage in violence. So it's a joke. It really is. And I do think
we got more time.
Nope.
I do I'll just say, I do think Pisco is someone that I do enjoy debating. I hope that it makes for debates that is entertaining for people. I think Andrew is the best moderator going. The Crucible is the best moderation going. So I was happy that it happened here. And even though we didn't get to where I wanted to get, because I probably had 7 more hours of shit I could get to, you have to. I've moderated, and Andrew, you did a fantastic job. You have to cut shit off somewhere. So I totally get that, and I thank both of you. Hope the audience enjoyed themselves. I'd be happy to do it again at any time that I have some free time. So.
And Pisco, you're welcome back to platform whenever you'd like to come back for any future debates. Please keep the Crucible in mind. We enjoyed having you, and I appreciated that you adhered to moderation. So, gentlemen, with that, I'll let you both go. Have a wonderful night, and thank you both for coming on the Crucible this fine evening.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, audience. Much love.
Have a good one. Have a good one, Rob. Take care. All right, guys. Fun times. Lots more debate content coming up here on the Crucible, with a bunch of high-profile debates coming up. Isabella Riley soon will be making her debate debut here on the Crucible. And much, much more of the wonderful content that you can only find here and seemingly nowhere else anymore on the fucking whole internet. Isn't that great? Seemingly nowhere else can you find this. So anyway, best analysis, the best debates, the best trash talk anywhere on the whole fucking internet, right here on the Crucible. Now I was kind of surprised just a little bit that you guys didn't want to see me absolutely destroy Pisco on the same topic, because I would have, but you didn't want to pony up the cash. So I feel like that was a big pass from you. You guys are very particular about who you want me to fucking debate these days. It's in some ways a little bit annoying, but fair enough. Fair enough. Anyway, from all of us here, the Crucible, to all of you out there in Crucible Land, have a wonderful night.